Welcome to episode 172 of the Sae Bae cast. We're coming up on almost 3.5 years and 600 hours of conversations with some of the best in the old school community. As a podcaster, I've largely relied on basic ad revenue, as I've not yet reached enough growth to be sponsored. Recently, however, YouTube has slowed algorithmic traffic on virtually all past episodes, drastically reducing my monthly ad earnings. So if you've been enjoying these long-form conversations and have the means, I invite you to support my content through YouTube membership or over on Patreon. I'm very passionate about the Sae Bae cast and would love to viably put out more and more episodes for years to come. Thank you all very much, and now here's my conversation with the legendary Mod Kieren. All right, welcome to the Sae Bae cast number 172 with Mod Kieren. Mod Kieren, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Really happy to be here. Finally.
So as we were just talking right before this recording, you actually were on a podcast earlier this morning, and you were just saying that you hadn't been on a podcast for years, and now you have 2 podcast appearances literally stacked in one day. So
It's utterly ridiculous, really, but it's purely coincidence that we're starting to experiment with an official one. And it happened to be we recorded it on the same day that we organized weeks earlier to record today. But it's good fun. I enjoy talking about this game. I enjoy talking about my life or whatever you want to talk about and ask me, really.
I'm really excited. I am curious though with that kind of like official podcast. So it's like is it Jagex sort of run? Like you say official, so is that like, so it's kind of under the brand of Jagex? It's not like you kind of have to watch what you say sort of, or how is that all? And is it just run by Mod Sween and Mod Aiza and they're kind of like the hosts, or how is this all working?
Yeah, so it's really early days. It's Aiza and Sween are the ones sort of leading the creative effort to do this project. But it's basically a pilot. We recorded a few pilots just to try and test the format, learn from it, see what we want to do with it. But it's under the Old School RuneScape banner, so not like Jagex as a whole.
Okay.
It would be an old school focused podcast, and we're working out how we want to do it. We're trying to make a more casual tone. It wants to offer something different to like what the Twitch Q&As do, right? There's no point doing this. There's no point doing the same thing, but as an audio format, right? You may as well just you watch Twitch if you want the Q&A experience. So it's trying to be more lighthearted, a bit more we're having a conversation, and also veer off not just RuneScape at times if so called for, and have people get to know us a little bit more if it's JMod guests, and who knows what we do in the future. But yeah, I can't really say too much because it's not really my project, so to speak. It's more going to be in Mod Aiza and Mod Sween's heads what they want to ultimately achieve with it. But it's exciting as well. To be getting something like that going.
I'm a huge consumer of podcasts. I make my own, obviously, but I'm a huge consumer, so I'm really excited to hear your appearance on it later.
Yeah. What else do you listen to, whether old school or not?
Well, old school. I mean, I listen to like the Based After Dark podcast. There's been a few different RuneScape podcasts that have kind of come and go. There's the Guthix Rest podcast. I give that a listen here and there. The OSRS podcast with Rice Cup, Mint Mad Cow, and Rakesy. I would listen to occasionally. I mean, there's plenty of other like non-OSRS podcasts I listen to that I could just go on forever about. But yeah, I mean, I've really wanted to. Oh, and I used to listen to like the old Hexus podcasts and like those like way back in the day and stuff. So I always want my like OSRS fix. I'm also a huge fan of Ramblers. So like my content is the stuff that I would normally listen to. Like I love talking about the game. I want to hear people talk about the game. So.
Yeah, I tend to listen to podcasts a lot while I'm driving, and that's basically it. I won't sit at home and put it on while I'm scaping. I'll normally have it on in the car, audio only.
Yeah. Walks for me is like that's where I get all my podcast audio, and then occasionally when I'm gaming, I'll listen. So, but yeah, I'm excited for that. I mean, I trust Aiza and Sween. I've had them both on my cast twice, and like they're just amazing to hear and listen to. So yeah, I wonder how that's all gonna shape up to be over time, because it does take time to like get it right. I feel like, and I don't feel like actually it's never even you're getting it right. You're just always improving and always trying to like learn new things. And
Totally, and
yeah,
so they're hosting it together, and obviously those two are very close, and
yep.
everyone knows that. So like they've got a good relationship, and ultimately, if you're a learning journey for them, like as you know, having done what number did you say this is?
172.
Like 172 podcasts.
Yeah, and
You're gonna learn a lot as a host, and
yep.
sometimes you're gonna have guests that are more forthcoming and guests that are more difficult to get info out of, and it's kind of almost on the host to try and get that out of somebody, right? And almost
Yeah, yeah.
help someone feel comfortable.
Yeah, it's a learning experience the whole way through. Even at 172, I'm still like trying to improve, and every single guest is different too, so it makes it tough because it's not like you're just talking to the same person. You're really just able to iron out all these kinks. It's like every single
Yeah.
guest is different, and some people don't want to talk as much, some people do, and you're just trying to strike a good balance. But there is literally so much to talk about. You used to be a developer, and now you are an associate design director. Can you tell us the difference between those two
Yeah.
roles?
Essentially, it's the same job but more senior. So the titles have changed around a bunch. So obviously you might have heard the term content developer used quite a lot. And in fact, with people you've interviewed previously. Um, Obviously, I was a content developer myself, and then eventually became lead content developer, and then I moved to associate design director. But that is not to say it's a different team. It is the same team, and so everybody who was a content dev, I mean, we got this all changed about 14 months ago now, like early last year, and they all moved from content developer to game designer or some variety of that. So content developer just isn't a title, and this is the weird thing. Everyone, it feels very familiar to us as people who've played RuneScape for a long time. We've heard it a lot, and then obviously having worked at Jagex, it's very common to hear it. But you go to any other games company, it's just not a title people use. So it's something that when I became a lead of this team with the content dev team, I wanted to fix because it's good to fix it for multiple reasons. In that the people in the team, it helps their careers, it helps them understand where they stand within the industry, and helps them ultimately. Like if one day they want to leave and go to another company, they've got bigger ambitions, whatever it is, that better feeds into that. But also, even within Jagex, it helps everybody else understand what we are. There's so many times we've brought in other people into Old School, into Jagex, and it needs explaining. Like, what the hell's a content developer? What does that do? Is that programming? Is it design? Is it a combination? Like, where does it sit? So, yeah. So now we are all game design essentially. So some people are game designers, some people are systems designers, some people are technical designers, some people are narrative. I'm sure you can guess. Like Mod Ed is a narrative designer, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. Um, as you know, he's running quests. He's coming up with the story, the direction for our narrative, and that influences not just his own content but other people's too. And so the jobs haven't really changed. We've just really nailed down what the titles are for the jobs, and all this side of stuff, right? This is corporate crap, right? Like it's job descriptions, it's recruitment, it's building a team, and that's a lot of the stuff I've been having to do since I've went into a leadership role. But it's also really important that people feel motivated, excited about what they're doing, they understand what they're doing, and that obviously also helps with what we actually are able to output as a team into the game too. And so yeah, it's kind of the dull side of everything, but I'm very glad we've put that right. So so first part of the question, yeah, content dev, design direction, and design are basically the same thing.
Mm.
We are quite technically strong designers because we are using an ancient engine, right? We're using RuneScript. It came out in Jagex 20 odd years ago, so it's obviously been iterated on a lot. So we need to be quite technically strong compared to maybe what a designer might be at many studios, depending on the engine. But it's fair to call us design. And in terms of my role, in being an associate design director, is very much that leadership element. So nowadays, I'm not the one sat in front of a PC coding all day. Um, detailing out designs, reward specs, and all that sort of stuff for a piece of content, like maybe I did in the past. I'm more so coming up with a sort of idea of this is what I want us to do with this project. So to use like Tombs of a Mascot, for example, the latest raid, I was saying to the team and communicated via a document and everything, I want us to target, make this like one of the most accessible raids we've done. I want us to learn from what went wrong with Theatre of Blood and capture these things into the project. And then I'd be acting in a sort of advisory feedback role, working with the people on the team. So like people like Mod Arcane, who was doing a lot of the boss design, I was constantly playtesting what he was showing me. He was seeking my input as advice as somebody who's obviously done a lot of boss design in the past, and so on. So like my role becomes almost like I'm touching most the projects now. I'm just not going to the level of I've dealing with really small details of the project, so to speak. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that actually sounds like the most fun position to kind of like oversee things and get to test every little bit of it. So, do you enjoy it more than what you used to do?
It's got pros and cons, for sure. I miss being able to sit down and just focus on one project for 6 months.
Mm.
I tell you, it's more enjoyable and less stressful. It's not like without stress, it has its own challenges. You're constantly worried you're going to disappoint people or whatever. But there's obviously a fun to that. And seeing people play something that's very much yours is really satisfying. But now, obviously, in some sense, I get a lot of say over a lot of projects, a lot of influence over a lot of people. It's amazing to see the growth in the team itself, and like, you know, people like Ed, or people like Arcane, or whoever in the team who've been with us for a number of years at this point. It's amazing seeing the growth they go on and how much they've learned over the years. But I get the satisfaction in almost every launch, ultimately, rather than just mine. So it's kind of spread out in that sense. But obviously, it is stressful. There's a lot of different things I deal with now. I'm talking to Old School's senior leadership quite a lot, working with other people like Mod Ash to really strengthen what our roadmap should be, talking about the different potential projects we should include and shouldn't include, what we want to achieve with them, obviously, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's satisfying from that point of view, but it is scary having that kind of weight of responsibility
Mm-hmm.
on your shoulder. There's 1,000 different ideas we could do at any one time, but we only have so many people, and having to select sort of which are the right things to do, and you're also second guessing how long will this idea take. Some ideas take longer than others, so it's constantly assessing what's the best bang for our buck, what's the right thing to do, what are our players looking for, and there's loads that go into that, and I can talk more about that shortly if you like.
Well, let's. I am just fascinated by the obviously just the development of the Inferno because we literally see it's been 7 years or so, and it's still one of like the gold standard pieces of content, at least in regards to PVM. And I'm pretty sure you were like the lead creator of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And God, 7 years ago, that is
Yeah.
terrifying. That
I
is a long
know.
time. I
So
can't
long
believe it's
ago.
been 7 years. It feels like yesterday. I feel like the pandemic kind of just stole a bunch of years,
Oh,
and
it
so it
did.
feels like it's just flown by. But
A- And before the Inferno, Chambers had come out, and that was just like 6 months prior, I want to say. And you worked on that too, right?
yes,
Or
I
was
worked
that?
on the Olm
Yeah, it must have
for
been.
for Chambers of Zarek.
Okay,
So
just
Chambers of
Olm.
Zarek, Jan 2017, and Inferno was what, June
Yeah, June
of
2017
2017?
should have been.
Yeah, I was only recently moved into development at that point because when I first joined Jagex in 2015, I was QA. So I was QA for about 7, 8 months or so before I moved into to being a junior content developer at the time. So I joined the team obviously when it was tiny, right? Like, it seems crazy now, but 2015, the old school team was like 11, 12 people or so. And
Crazy.
so how we ran the team, how we communicated and everything was so different. We had this tiny area in the office that you could just turn around and talk to everybody, anybody you needed, anytime. And now we're like God, I don't even know the number. 70 plus in the core old school team, and then we get a lot more support from other areas of Jagex too. So it's a mad difference. But yeah, also Chambers of Xeric, it wasn't just the Olm, but primarily the Olm. So I also did the tightrope room.
Mm.
You know, the mages and the rangers that hit so hard. I don't know why I made them hit quite that hard. Don't ask. I didn't necessarily give it the same level of thought we would give it now. I just didn't. But it also kind of has its own vibe because of it.
Yeah.
I like that room because it's quick.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because it's a good room, but just because it's quick and good points. Um, I did all the potions and the farming system that's in Chambers as well. So that was quite a fun thing to code. Which a lot of these things were new experiences for me at the time because I'd never designed things like that. But yeah, so obviously the implementation of overloads, the brew and super restore equivalents, and all of those things I had to do. And then obviously Dion was the majority of my time on the project, and the first boss I had done. And let me tell you, I was terrified. I'm a junior designer, I'm a junior developer. I've not done anything quite like that before. But PVM was my forte, like as a player.
Yeah.
That's what I was known for already, and played an absolute shit ton of PVM across like 2010 to 2014 kind of times, in primarily RuneScape, of course, before Old School came out. So stuff like Nex in 2011, I must have done 10,000, 20,000 kills, something
Jesus.
ridiculous. I just did it all day, and for somehow I just enjoyed it continuously. I always did that, and even after AOC came out, and like I wasn't a massive fan of AOC, but I was still playing quite extensively at the time, and so when things like Virago came out and hard mode Virago, I was on the team that got the first hard mode Virago kill, stuff like that. So like PVM was always my background, and I liked a lot of those sort of earlier bosses. But I sort of start to put things like Nex and beyond into like its own era where combat design stepped up. It stopped being just this big monster has a stack of stats and you attack it and it attacks you.
Yeah.
And it started being there's a lot more going on. Maybe Corp was the first step into that really, but even that is primarily just hits you really hard, and
Mm-hmm.
the core's the only thing going on otherwise. And then Nex had obviously all sorts going on, and things beyond that. And so that spirit of bosses being more than just a monster with loads of high stats obviously went into a lot of the stuff we did with Chambers of Xeric. But Olm was me trying to sort of create that to a final boss standard, where most of the other bosses in Chambers of Xeric were like they're sort of gimmicky, right? They have like one central quirk, and that kind of works really well for the identity of a raid boss. I don't think you could release um like Vasa Mysterio as a standalone boss. I think it would feel really weird.
Yeah.
It being a sort of gimmick doesn't quite extend, isn't strong enough for a standalone boss, but it's perfectly suitable for a raid boss. But Olm isn't. Olm's the final boss. It's got to be epic. And at the end of the day, I was sort of left alone to it. I was given so much trust by the rest of the team to try and come up with something. I sort of had some ingredients that I was given. So Mod Ghost, the artist, I think the only artist, or maybe we had two at the time. I can't remember exactly who was there by then, but Mod Ghost was the primary artist for the whole project, and I'd already gotten the sort of environment. We knew the boss was going to be in sort of coming out the wall, like in the scenery rather than where you can like stand normally. It'd be a stationary boss sort of thing. And we knew it'd have the three hands. Sorry, the two hands and the head, the three parts.
Mm-hmm.
And then much more, anything beyond that, we didn't really have. So I had to work with that and try and come up with ideas. I remember trying to, I had a notepad, and back then I'd draw a lot on a notepad, like a physical one, to try and sketch out ideas how things could work. Some of the things I came up with early were, all right, it'll have multiple phases, and each phase it will transition from one side to the other. We can do crystals falling while it does so, and so on. And that's sort of meant to be the idea. I don't know how well it actually comes across. But the idea is the arm slips down, and then he's obviously stumping along to the other side, hence why it's shaking and the crystals fall. But that, from a design perspective, is quite nice. It gives you a little bit of a break. Maybe it's slightly too long, but it's a chance to brew up
Hmm.
without losing DPS, right? You can use that time to brew, get to full health, and you're ready to go again. Um, and then it was a matter of obviously, well, what bloody ideas does it do? How does this boss fight elevate? And some of the principles I was thinking about, really, from my experience just playing other games, things I'd spoken to other people about, and not just from a Jagex perspective, from just talking to friends outside of work, not about Olm, but about bossing and games that are what's a good boss in video games. So many video games go down that sort of trope that, once you're attacking the boss, let's say it's got multiple parts, you like kill one hand, the hand goes away. And then you kill the other hand, the hand goes away. And it's like a lot of these games make the mistake that a boss gets easier throughout the fight because you're destroying certain parts of it and so on. I always hated that concept. The best bosses in games escalate. They get harder. Or they culminate in some sort of grand finale, so to speak. So I really wanted to make sure that was the case for Olm, and I didn't want to fall into the trap with the fact that, hey, you can kill one hand, and then it gets easier because that hand no longer is a threat. So I wanted to make sure we mitigated that, despite the fact that obviously you obviously can kill one of the hands. That doesn't really manifest because of the way the phases work. It
Hmm.
returns, and then you end up with the big finale phase. And ultimately, we didn't have a massive art budget. As I said, it's basically one guy. Back then, our approach was a lot more reuse of assets. So, like, as much as Olm itself is unique, it doesn't actually have a whole lot of animations. The head can move side to side. It can fire projectiles. The hand has a few different effects that glow on it.
Yeah, I,
I
I
mean, that's
actually
about that's about it.
I actually remember Ghost kind of talking about, because he was still kind of learning the whole sort of like animations and what looks good. And one of the things he kind of regretted was not having Olm have really strong animations. It seems like he made it really smooth, and that was one thing he kind of regretted. He wanted Olm to look more aggressive, but the way it actually came across in game was overly smooth. There's almost too many
Yeah.
frames basically happening. So I do,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's interesting because, like, from my perspective, I'm mostly focused on mechanics, and
Hmm.
I just need the animations to do what they need to do to communicate to the player that a certain mechanic's happening. And really, that's what the animations are for, right? Like,
Yeah.
the Olm moves its head a certain direction. That's a signposting to the player that the Olm's doing something. Um, and Yeah, so I mean, I can agree with Ghost. Like, if it looked a bit more aggressive and sharp movement rather than the smooth thing, it might have helped to portray it as more fearsome, so to speak.
Hmm.
But yeah, I essentially had a handful of asset animations to work with, and so a lot of the attacks that the head does are just projectile based. It's the exact same animation the head does, but it's a different colored or shaped projectile that comes out of it, and most of those are used elsewhere in the game. I just dug through whatever else we had. I might have recolored it, things like that. But that allowed me to just get a lot of different things that can, again, the color, the shape of the projectile as it flies through the air. You can recognize what it is. You can see that mage attack. You can see the difference with the range attack and other things it obviously does as well.
One
Um,
one of the
yeah.
like fascinating things that I have heard over time is like, well, one, I mean, I don't know when solo gameplay really started emerging. I know obviously Wooks was just there pretty much day one trying to solo that thing, but it seems like there was almost intentionally some sort of rhythm to abuse Olm so that you could do like 4-1 or 4-0. Was that ever in your mind to like add like the
Oh,
rhythm of it to make it just somehow work out super well?
the thing is, my perspective from when I was developing it and my perspective now are obviously quite different. I've learned a lot. I know a
Yeah.
lot more about stuff. But back then, I didn't necessarily know exactly how players would abuse it or what they would do or what strategies they would utilize. But I knew the timing for the head's movement and so on was essentially abusable. That you could get across the room in the right sort of time frame needed, right? Um, in fact, the original draft was much more egregious. So I had to, how the sort of like two dividing lines that splits the room into like three.
Yeah.
based on where the head's looking.
Mm-hmm.
Like those lines were originally much closer together, so it was much more like even thirds of the room. And I think now what it is the middle section's a lot bigger than the other two.
Yep.
And that was because I was aware of this. So I knew it was going to happen to the fact that you could abuse the head's position. But I wouldn't know necessarily how players were going to do it or what they were trying to gain out of it. But I left it intentionally possible because I think discovering that sort of stuff is a good part of boss design.
It is. It's so important.
There's a balance to it all. In that it's got to be fair. Like it can't be too OP. In that if you execute this, or it's too easy to execute, the gains are too strong. So obviously, like managing to avoid a bunch of special mechanics is quite a strong result, really,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of balancing. But the effort to pull it off is kind of worth it, right? It's about right. From a player perspective, it feels right. Like it's kind of a choice. You don't actually have to do that. You could easily just deal with the mechanics. But you can also put in a lot of effort to learn something very precise and then execute that rhythm consistently. Isn't easy to do at first when you're learning. So that there is a kind of curve to it. And that kind of having those options available, like, sort of stepping back at the Muspa boss, for instance, is kind of a similar territory where like the gains from it are kind of about right for the effort you have to put in to do it. But you don't need to, which is good because that allows you to have these skill curves to these pieces of content, right? Like your average noob can do Chambers as Eric in a team, no issue. They'll probably not skip things, they'll have to deal with the special mechanics, but they can get by just fine. But a pro player could go in solo or even in a team and be using these strategies to elevate their success and start to do no preps and all those sort of things. Like you can get more out of the content by being better and learning and pushing yourself forward further. I think that's the essence of what we ideally want. But like as I was saying, these are hard to create intentionally because it's like I didn't go in with the mindset originally of like, all right, if we use a head movement mechanic, we can allow this sort of behavior to happen. It's just, hey, we're gonna make like originally it kind of started. All right, the head should look in the direction of the players, sort of thing. It's just a loose concept, right? Like it's more realistic if the head's looking towards you. When you fight an NPC, a proper NPC, obviously it looks towards you. But when you fight the Olm, it's a piece of scenery in the wall, essentially. So how can we make sure that it's looking at you? That was one of the basic idea at the first, and obviously the specific mechanics that they're involved in that came later.
It's also, I imagine, really difficult to make it so even if you're trying to add some sort of emergent gameplay for the future, making it too abusable would also be a problem. Something where like that a player will be able to learn how to just entirely mitigate damage by doing something. If it's too easy or if it's too like easy to manipulate in a way, then that can be a problem because you don't want the fight to just be super easy. So there is like a fine balance to be had there, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally. And when these things happen by accident, because sometimes they do, right? We don't necessarily realize something could be abused in that way.
Mm-hmm.
The temptation most designers, I think, have naturally is we should nerf that. We should stop that from happening because that's not what I intended.
Yeah.
And the sort of message I give to the team nowadays is try to embrace these things because they elevate the content. They don't take away from it. Just because a player isn't executing the content in the choreographed way you wanted it to be done doesn't mean it's bad or it's flawed. It matters on that point we were just talking about, the balance of it. If it's undermining the content completely, letting people beat the boss too easily and surpass the challenge, or it's too easy to abuse, completely too easy to abuse, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
And that needs thinking about. And obviously that means sometimes we do have to kind of be the bad guy because we can't allow, say the final boss of the Colosseum to be done in a fairly cheap way. We want it to be an epic challenge, and if there's a fairly trivial way to do it, bypasses the mechanics. That doesn't feel fair. If that was really hard to execute, we might have a different stance on it. As long as it's got the same sort of balance taken into account, we can get away with it, with leaving it.
Were you behind the decision? So when TOA dropped, I'm pretty sure within like the first week, Akka butterfly method kind of came out, and it was just a way to completely mitigate all damage as long as you just have good rhythm, know the tiles to stand on. What was the team's decision behind? Because I think initially it kind of got nerfed, and then there was like you guys reverted your decision and kind of left it in. What was going on behind the scenes there? Do you remember?
I don't know the full details, as it was mostly the team that worked on tour directly that were making the decision. But it's the same. It's the issue I just sort of spoke about. Like as I say, that sort of natural instinct is holy shit, they're bypassing this boss and almost entirely, right? They're bypassing one of the core mechanics. That feels unfair. We need to stop that. That's the natural reaction, and I think that makes sense that that's the natural reaction because it almost feels hurtful. You've just spent loads of time creating these mechanics, and now no one's doing them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's then the thinking about it, listening to players, reacting to it, that ultimately obviously leads into making the right call. Because I would argue it's not actually that easy to do. You need to learn quite a few things. So people mark tiles for it, and then you got to get the timing right. So like, it's not easy to do. It has its own challenges, and it's not like you're bypassing particularly difficult mechanics anyway.
Yeah.
You're upping your DPS because you can stay on the style you want, that sort of thing. The consequences of it aren't ridiculous, and so ultimately, I think it's just thinking it through, taking the time to read opinion, because I reckon what happened is players kicked up a fuss and felt it was unfair to remove it. That's probably part of it, and that's also obviously a big thing with Old School in general. We do genuinely try to listen all the time. Obviously, for everything we do, we pull content, but even when things go out, we do want to try and listen and make sure we try and get it right. But we've got to try and balance everybody's opinion because there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of players, and they all have slightly different views. How do we take that into account, balance that with our own, and make sure that we're doing the best thing for everybody?
Okay, I'm very curious for this question I have, which is when you were designing the Inferno, did you think at all that maybe this is going to be too hard for the player base? Or like, what was especially when it dropped, like when it actually got released, what was going on in your mind? Like where you're like, oh crap, like this might be a little bit too difficult. Did you ever have that thought go in your mind?
It was kind of what we set out to do. So no, I don't think I ever thought it was going to be too hard because we did set out to create the hardest challenge in the game, right? Mm-hmm. It was meant to be the aspirational goal that players will try and achieve to get the ultimate cape, right?
Yep.
And very much trying to mimic the spirit of what the Fire Cape was at launch as well, right? Maybe that wasn't so extreme even at launch, but the Fire Cape for every new player is that kind of immediate aspirational challenge. Oh my god, how am I going to beat Jad? It feels ridiculous now because Jad seems so trivial to everybody. But
not everybody.
We all kind of remember that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? We all remember how, like, sort of getting Jad hands and being scared and then misclicking a prayer or whatever. It took me. I remember doing Jad myself back in 2007, and it took me 8 attempts at the fight caves. I think I made it to Jad every time. Died multiple times because it's just none of us was strong. I didn't even use F keys to switch tabs. Like I didn't even know it was a thing. So you're doing all this, and obviously it's scary. You're like panicking. You don't dare want to take your mouse away from your protection prayers. And I can almost remember specifically like the first 3 runs. I didn't even make it to healers, and then I got one where I got past healers but forgot to drink a prayer pot. And if you remember, there wasn't a nice convenient orb at the top of your screen telling you had to switch to the skills tab to see what your prayer points were.
Yep.
Which, obviously ridiculous.
Rough
that was
days.
Difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
But then eventually I did it, and it was like the most amazing feeling to finally get that satisfaction and have that done. It's behind you. You basically never need to do it again. You've got a fire cave, and you can show that off. And as we grew up, a lot of people got very confident at Jad. It no longer was the big scary threat it was, and when I joined Jagex, it was one of the first things I pitched. I remember my first day. So my first day was meant to be the Monday, but before I joined, the old school team was due to do an off-site meeting. So obviously back then we were not working remote; everyone's on site in the office. But when we needed a big meeting, like an all-day meeting, or we wanted to get out of the usual work environment to do deeper things, bigger conversations, we'd often book like a conference room elsewhere outside the office. And that's what Old School were doing the Friday, literally like sort of the day before I was meant to join. And so they still invited me along, despite the fact I wasn't quite part of the team yet. And so that was my first ever day of Jagex, was actually in a meeting room in a hotel in Cambridge. And we spent the whole day talking about plans for Old School. We were all just sharing ideas, things we think should be in the schedule. And obviously the team was quite small, so everyone could have a seat at the table and discuss these things. And the two things I brought to the table that I really, really wanted to do was Fight Caves 2, which obviously didn't quite have the name of the Inferno yet, and Monkey Madness 2 was the other thing I was really, really keen to do. And obviously the pitch for Fight Caves 2 was very much, let's create that aspirational goal. Let's create that. And obviously everyone was quite on board with it. We didn't do it that quickly. I joined in 2015. It took until, 2017 for us to finally get around to it. But obviously it came around and I got the project and went on to create it. But it took me a while to sort of think of the idea. But the ideas that were with me initially was the Zuck idea, what Zuck does with the sort of moving shield. So at first, my pitch wasn't a moving shield in the lava. It was actually that, like, Zuck would be on land, potentially, not actually behind the wall. And then there'd be this sort of moving turtle creature, like a hardened shell of lava, and that would be the moving shield. And it'd walk left to right across the environment, and it'd basically be the same thing. You move behind the shield. But I was thinking you'd run out to melee the boss and then run back behind the shield. That obviously changed, and I think the what we did later and what we did now was a lot simpler. It was a lot easier to execute it. It made more sense than the fact there's this random turtle creature that, why is it there? What's it doing? But like the idea just were iterated from there. That ultimately, this is the sort of mechanic we've never done before, really. It's not like a 3D game where the walls and scenery kind of block projectiles and gunfire or whatever it is. It's weird for Old School to work in up that kind of way. So it's a bit of a hack to really pull it off, but obviously the idea being, if you're behind the shield, then, well, he can't throw a projectile at you, it's going to hit the shield. The next step was like, what if the shield dies, right? Like, it does damage to the shield. So,
yeah.
Like, these sort of ideas started to come together and into what obviously was the ultimate result. And then it was like, what if Jad spawns?
Yeah, that's the question I have. Like, where did that come from? Like, let's spawn a Jad while you're dealing with this, because at the time that was insanity to do that.
So it really was. And I remember sitting in a meeting with, I don't know if you remember Mod Ronan, who was the first community manager on Old School, and Mod Alfred, who was the first artist on Old School. So Alfie must have been there when we were doing Chambers of Xeric. I can't remember. But I sat in a meeting room, I was like, this is my idea. And I was drawing an awful sketch on the whiteboard with like big, awfully drawn circles and pictures of Chad. And I was like, right, okay, so the boss is going to be here. It's going to throw projectiles at you. But if you hide behind this moving shield, the shield will block them. But then various other creatures that you've already fought on the ways will spawn. But instead of attacking you, they will attack the shield. And you will have to attack them to pull them off the shield. And the thinking from that, the inspiration was just healers from Jad. It's the same sort of thing. Healers come in, they target Jad. You've got to target the healers to pull them off Jad and distract them. And the same sort of concept, right? These creatures spawn and attack the shield. You attack them to distract them. So it was all inspired by the fact it was this kind of sequel And I thought that was cool. And then all right, you're not going to be able to you could sit there and prey flick them, right? Potentially, but I realize you're probably going to have to kill them, because it's going to be probably quite a long fight. You're probably not going to have to sit there and prey flick them. You've already got a lot to deal with. But ultimately, testing it, I thought that was too easy. Actually, you know what? I'm trying to remember the story, exactly how it came up. No, the Jad was earlier, because the Jad was in that meeting with Ronan and Alfie. So I think it maybe was more of a concept or an idea that I wasn't sure yet. But I remembered I said to them, but then what if Jad spawns and attacks the shield? And I remember Ronan and Alfie being like, what the fuck? Because this obviously sounds absurd. People already at this point, it was already people thinking this is so hard.
Yep.
This is so brutal.
Yep.
And but yeah, obviously it was the development where I spent probably the Inferno development. 3/4 of it would have been the Zuck fight alone, and me playtesting it and iterating it and tweaking the numbers. I spent so long trying to balance that so it was right. But ultimately, I felt it needed the Jad. It needed that moment to spice it up.
Yep.
And the healers only come along late on as well. So I was finding it too easy. Now, bear in mind, I'm playtesting it by spawning in at the final wave, right? So like,
Yeah.
you have none of the same pressure that players actually have when they do it for real.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just spawning at the final wave with a Tebow and playtesting it,
And
just trying to get a sense of how it feels.
and you know what's coming up. Like you literally designed it, so you know exactly what's coming. Oh, for the first few people that were doing Inferno, they have no idea what is about to happen.
Yeah, they had no clue.
Yeah.
Um, no, yeah, obviously I knew that after somebody gets into half health, Jad's gonna spawn, and then when some people get into low
You
health,
were so
the healers
excited
will
for that, I
spawn.
bet.
Oh, it was so good. But the healers, I thought, were the perfect final ingredient.
Yeah.
That they throw everything you've just done up in the air. Suddenly, where you were standing is no longer safe. Suddenly, you're taking loads of chip damage, and you're panicking because your health's going down. Like, it really does mess with you to what you'd done perfectly, probably up to that point. So it just kept having one more thing to deal with. And as I say, like, it comes back to that basic boss design principle. I want things to escalate. Things should feel like they're stepping up and stepping up. And so Jad is one element of that, but also then the healers are the sort of last hurrah of, the last ditch fuck you maneuver,
Yeah,
basically.
literally. What about
Uh,
triple Jads? What was did you think triple Jads might have been pushing things a little bit too far? I mean, imagine if Ronan was in that
no,
room, he'd be
no.
like, no, no, no. Don't do that.
People thought it was crazy at first,
Yeah.
but it honestly become because so I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but RuneScape had already done a Fight Cave sequel,
Okay.
called the Fight Kiln, and often you get the benefit of hindsight, right?
Hmm.
We can look at that and see what worked, what didn't work, and so on. One element was I thought their final boss didn't live up to what Jad was. Their final boss felt really underwhelming. It wasn't that the way it was easy to beat the kiln. I felt the waves were actually quite difficult, but the final boss wasn't harder than the waves. It didn't feel like a culmination. But the second point is they did a double Jad. Now, the problem with it is they had this power up system going on. Like every wave, you could pick up a crystal from the floor, and these crystals give you really strong power ups. And all you had to do was save one of the power ups, and you could just basically negate that whole wave by making
Hmm.
yourself immune for so long. And so no one really ever actually got to properly deal with two Jads. There was also a safe spot in the room, so like you could utilize this piece of scenery in the middle and block one of the Jads off. So you just didn't have to actually fight two Jads at once. The threat of it was there, the idea of it was scary, but in reality it was quite easy to deal with. I wanted people to deal with double Jads properly, so I ended with a Jad and then a double Jad and then the final boss. And also, I didn't have healers on these Jads
Mm.
because I thought you're already dealing with two Jads. It definitely doesn't need healers as well. But then I was beating it first time, and I'm not trying to big up my own skills. I know my skills are nowhere near what the players are. I've not beaten Inferno myself, for example.
Mm.
Um, I feel like I probably could if I give it the effort, but
That's
I
actually
just
crazy to
genuinely haven't.
hear. I would have expected you to do it by now.
I feel like I could. I've just kind of probably just put it off of the effort I know it's going to take to learn the waves, because I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
waves that will take me time, and so I just haven't ever really fancied doing that grind. I don't know why.
That's fair. That's
Maybe I should at some point because it would
yeah.
be nice to do.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, like, essentially demonstrates the point, right? Like, I did 2 Jads first go.
Hmm.
It wasn't that hard. First point is obviously I off ticked them intentionally when I spawned them because I thought that's the fair thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be harsh if they both spawned in and you had to instantly like walk under one of them to or run away from one of them to off tick it. So I off ticked them intentionally. I think that's the bit that made it quite easy because you actually got quite a lot of time, right? Jad's attacks quite slowly, so the fact you can just quickly swap your prayers to each of them, no issue at all. And it was too easy. So I added in healers, and I still thought it was too easy, and that's why I went to 3. And I still thought 3 was quite manageable, and I had no issue dealing with 3 myself, and not many people in the team exactly had issue with it.
And it was 3 with healers.
But 3 with healers,
Okay.
yeah. But I still knew that I can't push it much further. It's not the final boss.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another boss to come after it, which is obviously much more insane. And I also know that in reality, you've just done 68 waves,
Yeah.
or however many it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you've done maybe 2 hours of waves, and so dealing with 3 Jads where one mistake's going to hurt you, because these Jads, I think their max hit's higher than the regular Jad. Your odds of dying if you mess up are higher than before. So I didn't feel I could push it much further. 3 was good, and obviously we've added the challenges since. You can go and do 6 Jads and stuff in game to see maybe if we'd pushed it further, what it'd be like. But it didn't need pushing further, so I thought that's good. And people obviously when they're on launch, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my time at Jagex. That those first few days watching people do attempts where you had 10, it must have been sometimes it was 20k plus viewers in people's streams, I think.
Yeah.
And people would just jump from one stream to another because obviously the attempts take so long. All the viewers would be on whoever's in the furthest, basically.
Yep.
Whoever's most likely to get to the boss. And I didn't sleep that night on the launch day. Like I remember I sat in bed, I had my TV in front of my bed on, watching Wook's stream at 3 a.m. I think this is when the "what is Yad doing here" moment happened. And obviously that was amazing to watch that. But no one beat it. No one beat it the first night. No one beat it the second day. And that weekend, I was flying to America on holiday.
Wow.
With friends. So we were flying from Manchester in the northwest of England. Obviously, I was living in Cambridge, so I think it was the Friday night I drove up to Manchester, hung out with my friends that night, and then the Saturday morning we were due to go to the airport to fly to Boston. And it was that morning, and I was watching it on my phone on Twitch, on the Twitch app, where Wix finally beat it. And so I did get to see it, and I was very grateful that it didn't happen while I was on the flight or something like that. But it was a genuinely surreal experience, just how much the whole community was sort of united around watching these Inferno attempts, and it kind of showed the value to me, and like not many people could beat Inferno or even wanted to give it a go at launch because it was so hard, but it still managed to sort of engage and get so many people excited despite the fact they weren't even playing it. And obviously I think now you really see the other side of it is it's maintained that aspirational challenge. Obviously there's a lot more people who've beaten it now, but it's seen as that achievement to really go for and get. So I'm very proud of obviously what happened with Inferno and everything that's come since it. The reaction to it and everything was amazing.
I wonder how you and the team kind of felt about, the wider community not even wanting to do it. Because I remember watching, I mean, I was there, I was in college, and I was watching, it's just like stream hopping, watching these people do their attempts and stuff. And I remember telling myself, like, I will never step into this piece of content. This is just stupid. Like, this is just ridiculously too hard. Like, the fact that Wooks can't get it in a day, like, there's no way I'm even going to step in here. It's just not worth it, not worth the time. And I'm imagining vast majority of the community felt the exact same way I felt. Did you guys kind of obviously you guys didn't know exactly how the community felt. I mean, obviously on Twitch it was just popping off, but did you feel like maybe at any point did you feel like maybe this should be toned down, or were you very confident that like, no, this needs to remain as is? And I think there were like minor tweaks made and everything just to, make things a little bit more I
Yeah.
think like the major used to like off tick if it healed something and little things like that. But did you
Yeah,
ever
there might be a few little nitpicky issues.
were you guys concerned that maybe this wasn't going to be as popular, or was that just not really something you guys
I mean,
cared about?
because we set out to create what we created,
Hmm.
we were fairly happy. Like, but it's always a risk. Like, it's always something we need to think about because at a business level, you can almost think we've just spent however long I spent on it. It was only like 3 months, if that I spent on it.
Wow.
As the project, and that was all the other stuff as well, like the obsidian fishing stuff,
Oh yeah, yeah.
the new pickpocketing, the obby armor, and those sort of things, and the little town sort of surrounding it. I did as well, but ultimately, it's 3 months of development time. Is it right for us to prioritize 3 months of development time onto a project that like only like 10 people beat in the first week? Is that right? And so like that's a question we do have to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
But like the value of it showed itself, I think, over time.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think we knew that that should be the case, but it's definitely a long burner, right? It wasn't going to be the sort of release that goes out and all of a sudden memberships flooding high and everyone's coming back to old school. It didn't really do that. We obviously might want that in a big project, but it did other things. And so when it comes to even thinking about the roadmap now, it's the sort of thing we're thinking about. That when we release an aspirational piece of content like that, realistically, it's not going to be the sort of thing loads of people flock onto the game and play. But it will engage people, it will excite people about the game, and they will think, one day I can get to that piece of content, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe they won't know it immediately, but one day they might. And that's important because the whole game is about progression, right? You spend 99% of your time on old school growing your character, whether it's leveling your skills, completing quests, gaining new equipment, gaining enough gold to buy better equipment, whatever it is, it's all about progression. I'd say the game is all about the journey. I mean, it sounds cliche, right? It's not the destination, it's the journey. But
Yeah.
with old school, it really is that. If you compare it to other MMOs, World of Warcraft is not about the journey; it's about the destination. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just a different game, and that World of Warcraft want you to be endgame. You can fast track your progress, and it's all about the raids, right? They add dungeons, raids, and that's the top tier content. And they want most people to be endgame so that more people can play those pieces of content. But old school doesn't work like that. Instead, we set out to like embrace that journey. The progression system is what makes the game satisfying. So, if you want to if you want to get to Elf City, Prifddinas, and beat Song of the Elves, you have to do all these other quests. You have to get all these other requirements. You have to get enough equipment and combat stats so that you can beat the bosses. Getting 70 in those skills feels satisfying because of what you get for doing that. You can
Yep.
get access to quests, you get access to a whole new city, you get access to new content, then you do the gauntlet, then you do, to me, that's the bread and butter of RuneScape. So things like the Inferno existing as goals, as places to get to, the idea of getting to the Inferno and one day beating it is itself important to how this game works. Not even just playing the content and beating it, which is it's good in its own right. But having stuff like that for people to aim for one day is important because it motivates you to progress your character.
I want to talk about leagues because I remember, I don't know when this was. I mean, it was in the fall. It was several years back, and I remember you on a Q&A. I feel like you were the first person that kind of mentioned the idea of a leagues, and I think it was inspired by Path of Exile. And I feel like there was this sort of sentiment in the community that like, RuneScape can't be a temporary thing. RuneScape is just like a grind it can't be a temporary game mode. That wouldn't really make any sense. And it felt like maybe it was kind of copying Deadman Mode in a way, but ultimately Leagues was like the biggest success ever. And can you talk about like the whole ideation behind leagues and just your whole thoughts? I mean, we've had 4 very, very successful leagues at this point.
Leagues has been an amazing addition. It's probably the other idea I'm most proud of pushing and making happen for Old School. In that was something I really helped to put the concept together. I didn't necessarily develop it, because I was already in the sort of early days of my lead role at this point, and I wasn't necessarily writing much code and so on at the time. But it was the concept I first pushed, and helped to formulate the ideas for, and I'm buzzing for how far it's gone, and obviously it's been a huge success. So it is amazing looking back on how far we've come now, and we've learned an awful lot along the way. But the very earliest ideas were just, what if we just opened up a new old school server every 6 months, right? Like at a basic level, that's where the first seed was sowed, because starting new accounts is quite fun. Having a fresh high scores, a fresh economy, there's elements of those things that are fun as well. And obviously we didn't necessarily go for this, but we sort of started out with the concept of, hey, what if we just have a bunch of servers that reset every 6 months? People could play them. Not many people might, but they're there. They're an option for people if they care about that and want that. New high scores every time and so on. Maybe that will be fun. Trying to hark back to the experience when Old School first released in 2013, and everyone's on Tutorial Island together, everyone's in Lunge together, and no one has 90 herb lore for super combats, and you got to wait for that first person to get them. All these sort of facets to the game, but ultimately, we iterated on that basic idea to come to an idea of, well, what if every time it runs, there's a different spin on the game, so something changes, and what if it's really accelerated, because if it's only 6 months long, then all these other elements to it. And the interesting thing is, people might have different takes on this story, because not everyone was always privy to every single conversation that was had with different people and so on. But these are some of the ideas that were going through my head, at least. And I can't remember the exact details of how we ultimately got to doing it in the exact format we did, but ultimately we were very settled on the idea that it would be a short temporary thing. We knew we wanted a twist, and we knew we wanted it to be hyper accelerated, like some really fast XP, and we knew we wanted power-ups. And a lot of these thoughts came to mind from, actually, for me, not Path of Exile. I've not played the game. There are people now in the team who are obsessed with Path of Exile, and there's definitely inspiration that is taken from that game. But actually, some of the ideas that went into it, for me, were actually from Slay the Spire. Don't know if you're familiar with that game at all. So Slay the Spire is a sort of card game meets roguelike. But it's a single player. You're basically going through a dungeon, and it's a deck builder, so you're building a deck of cards, and you use these cards to basically fight different monsters. One of the key things in that game is you will come across really important choices, and it'll come up and it'll be offered you with a choice of 3 different power-ups, and you need to choose one of them, and it's a permanent choice that will obviously have a huge implication on the rest of your run through the dungeon. That sowed the seeds of the idea for relics in leagues, very much directly. And permanent choice, and tough choices was something that's not really present in Old School, but we had the ability to do that here. And I thought that will be really cool. People will debate which choice to make and strategize over it and argue for the one they choose. And we went into development by this point, and these ideas were being threshed out. We had a big meeting. I tried to discuss what should the first twist be. I remember we had probably half the Old School team at the time, and in the big boardroom at Jagex, and we all had whiteboards. We were writing down all the ideas we had. We split into small little groups, and each group sort of presented what they think's the right idea, and ultimately we settled on doing an area lock is the best thing we can do. Initially, it's a somewhat easy thing for us to pull off, and we ultimately settled on we think the only viable choice that works really well is Zaire. Obviously that ultimately become Twisted League. We thought all the other areas have issues. They're either way too extreme. And obviously, like you see, people like Settled have done their obviously Swamp Ledix, and starting an account in Mauritania is brutal, and you're very limited.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too much for a sort of game mode that's meant to be appealing to a lot of people. But Zaire's got quite open. There's lots of stuff that suits early game. It's got an end game with Chambers of Xeric. Like, it can work. And so we started from there. We came up with the idea for using a task system, but we like the idea that there's essentially, it's not like you've got a checklist of 10 things to do. It's a task list that is so large you're really not going to ever complete it. And that essentially tasks would be analogous to progressing your account. So, like, you get a bunch of skills in, you get a bunch of quests done, you get a bunch of other things done, and these things will generally contribute to tasks as well. And that will be your sort of central progression score. I think Sween was the person who came up with the idea of cosmetic rewards in the main game for progression in leagues, and I think that was a really strong idea, and it really started this notion that these other game modes are still linked to your main game's sort of progression in some capacity, and it gave you some extra reasons to care about it as well. Um, Obviously we move into development fully, and I remember the first pass on relics that the team had come up with, and my feedback was they're nowhere near strong enough. The first pass of relics felt more like diary rewards. You know, like some of them are really nice, they're nice little perks, they're nice extras, but they're not earth shattering. And this is basically my feedback. My feedback was, I want you to break the fucking game. Because that's what we can do with a league. We will never. I want the player to have access to power that we would never conceive of ever giving them in the main game. Break it. I want people to have infinite run. I want people to do triple damage, attack twice as fast, like whatever it is, right? Make people feel so powerful that you can turn up to these pieces of content that you used to struggle with and just absolutely rinse it. Like, that should be part of the feeling.
Yeah.
But these powers will come from these difficult trade-offs between different ideas, and that really then started. Everyone sort of got bought into that, and obviously we developed Twisted League, and we learned an awful lot from Twisted League about what worked. I think the task system was one of the biggest things we improved since then, and there's still loads of problems with like the UI component of it, but the difference between like a task in Twisted League and then in Trailblazer, which is the second league for me, was that we sort of said there's a task in Twisted that, like, get 20 woodcutting. Fair enough, fine. It's kind of boring. You get 20 woodcutting, you get the task. We said the direction we should change for Trailblazer is 20 woodcutting can remain a task, but break it down. What are the steps a player might follow to get 20 woodcutting? Well, you might get a steel axe. Great, that can be a task. You might chop an oak log. Great, that could be a task, right? Like, and make sure that essentially you will get task completions far more regularly, and you can try and target and strategize a path through these different tasks. And it's got to the point where, like, Mod Husky was basically aiming for at the start of Trailblazer, I want you to basically be able to click anything on screen and it will lead you to completing a task. And Lumbridge just, obviously there's so many tasks and Lumbridge just so many things that's like, you know, you talk to the chef and start the quest, great, you're gonna get tasked that way. You chop a log, you talk to the Lumbridge guide, like all of these things are tasks, and it really just, like, to me it's the heartbeat of leagues, right? You get that little task pop up. God, does it feel good? And that's another thing I thought was so important to get right is, like, I think doing a good UI is hard, but there's certain beats we had to get right, like always being aware of when your next relic unlock was and seeing that progress meter go up. We wanted that pop-up to happen. Like, it could have easily just been a message in the chat box like achievement diaries were. But we wanted it to be this really swish pop-up that would make you feel really good. It's just that extra level of, like, serotonin boost to completing a task because we wanted it to feel awesome. And I think obviously Trailblazer was where leagues really blew up, and people really loved that league. And basically, so we've brought Trailblazer basically back for Reloaded, and that core twist to the game, and we've talked about loads of different ideas of twists, but like I still, even at this point, I think none of them stand up to the core concept of area locked and
Yeah.
unlocking areas as you go. It's just so good. And it really, again, feeds into that same thing with relics. Permanent choice that matters. And so if we hear feedback from players like, I've got relic regret, I would love a sort of ability to change one of them or change an area later. It's like, the problem is that allowing you that reduces or diminishes completely the importance of that choice.
Yep.
So it's a difficult trade-off because I understand people make wrong choices and then feel bad about it, but at the same time, what makes it feel satisfying, what makes it feel so good to talk about and strategize is the fact it's permanent and you can't go back on it.
Yeah. And it's not like there's, I mean, most of them are pretty well balanced. So even if you chose something wrong, you can at least still appreciate what you do have, because all of them are super powerful. It just depends on kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, what you want to do in game.
totally. You can basically pick any combo, any set of areas, and you'll still be able to get points.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's ultimately the goal, right? A lot of people will get mixed up somewhat and think, I want to maximize my DPS or maximize my XP gains, but like ultimately, it's actually about points.
mm-hmm,
And so, even if you pick Fremennik or Desert and stuff like that, which were bad in Trailblazer, they are still actually can be really lucrative for points, and you're not going to feel shortchanged with respect to like chasing Dragon Trophy or
yeah,
something. But you will feel less powerful, and so like people obviously want to feel powerful as well, and that's also important. But we've learned a lot. Balancing's not always spot on. Like last recall was so powerful in League Two, and we didn't
yeah.
quite realize quite how important it would be. Such that in League Four, it was just basically something everyone got.
Yeah, no, I think that was also important. Like finding the ones that are truly, they almost become like iconic. I mean, last recall and just unlimited run, those just had to be essential basically. And I feel like that was a great choice just to add those like really essential items just across. Like it's a global thing now for everybody. Have you guys learned anything for a potential Leagues 5? Like, are you guys like planning to continue the area lock? Or are you gonna still try to explore different, like entirely different themes for a league?
We don't know fully for sure yet, but I think our mindset is somewhat that the area choosing system should probably be a mainstay, and we do things on top of that.
Mm,
So we don't know for sure yet exactly, and that doesn't necessarily rule out that we'll do different things in future leagues either. But we think it's strong enough that that can basically just become a sort of core feature of leagues,
yeah,
even if we wanted it to be. And that doesn't mean we can't do different things with that. It doesn't mean we can't change the rules with how you unlock areas. So, like, there's loads of things I think we can do with it still. Um, but the other thing we've learned is, and you touched on this a little bit, contemporary events work in old school and stuff. Leagues wasn't a small undertaking, right? Like, there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of tasks to plug in, all these power-ups, not necessarily cheap to implement either. There was a lot of extensive UI work to produce all these systems. It took us quite a lot of time, such that like again I kind of come back to this the earlier part of like part of my job now is we've only got so many development teams, what do we spend them on? And I look at I think 2021 it's 2021 when we did Group Iron Man and clans and so on. Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
that year loads of people felt like Old School wasn't producing enough content.
Hmm.
Loads of people were talking about how it's been ages since the last raid, there's nothing really to look forward to. I see people were buzzing about Group Iron Man, but like things like clans is a great system for us to add. I think like its value is really important, but it's not new content, right? It's not like everyone's thinking, oh my god, I need to log onto Old School tomorrow because clans is coming out. It's a really nice upgrade, but it's not new content.
Yeah,
In the same case of like Group Iron Man is a new game mode that sure loads of people play. I love it. I play it non-stop, but isn't for everybody, right? Lots of people who are just playing their main accounts got nothing that day. So we had a year where we had a bit of a drought of content, and the other thing, obviously, we were working on around Group Iron Man was that the next league. I think we were doing Shattered Relics around that point in time. And so part of what I've learned from that is like we can't afford to spend so much of our dev resource on leagues alone. And so when leagues were costing us, like to give some perspective, when Trailblazer I think took about 5 months of time from multiple staff. Like, so we had multiple content devs on it. We had extra content devs join in the later part of the project to make sure we could finish it. It was just a lot of work, and so I think if we genuinely ask players, do you want us to spend X% of our time on development for leagues? The answer would probably be no, to the level it was. And so so part of the change and mindset that went into leagues 4 was how can we start to do leagues not with less ambition, but more cost effectively and be a bit smarter with the things we choose to do, and still try and make them special and so on. So it's like it's not to try and say we're want to cheapen them out. We want them to be awesome events that matter still, and we know their importance and players love them, but we want to try and be smart with the time we put into it so that it doesn't harm the rest of the game's content.
Yeah.
Like we still want to produce other things, and so how can we do that? And to me, part of that means not going way too far or coming up with crazy bespoke new systems every single league.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can do that still, but like if you think like so much dev time is going to go into those things, like, and to your point, it's a temporary event. Does it make sense for us to spend 6 months of development effort on a system you're going to see once for a couple of weeks? Most people play leagues a couple of weeks and then
Yeah.
stop. Like, I don't think that makes sense. So we want our content to make the game better forever, and essentially, if we're spending time on temporary events, they don't make the game better forever. There are awesome things that people will play, but it kind of changes the equation a little bit for me, and I'm like, no, we can't go too far with it.
Uh,
But leagues are a unique beast in terms of the impact they have, in terms of how many people want to come and play them, how much people enjoy them. I think I'd say a lot of people would probably say the most fun time they've ever had with Old School is when they've been playing a league.
yeah, I mean, it showed with the player count as well with Leagues 4, the highest player count like we'd ever seen concurrent, right?
Yeah,
Um,
there's. I mean, it's mad, right? And
yeah.
I mean, talk about that a little bit, but like, yeah, it's mind blowing for us that in 2020, well, 2023 at the time,
Yeah.
we're hitting record numbers. Old School's
You
been
know.
out nearly 11. Old School's now over 11 years old, and yet we've managed to make Old School more and more successful, basically every year.
Yeah.
And I think that means we're doing something right. I think it's not necessarily easy to put our fingers on what is it that we're doing right, but things like leagues, paying attention to the community and listening, all these things feed into that. And but that's the thing temporary events do. They do spike traffic, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the time to play. I want to play the league, and lots of people do. So like our normal players, right? If you look at how many people are online right now, like 131,000. That's still mind blowing compared to where we were 5 years ago,
Hmm.
but it's not quite what we'd be at with a league. So it spikes traffic, and that's sort of the difference in terms of how they work. Is you get a flurry of activity, loads of people playing, and then a few weeks later it kind of goes away again. While permanent content updates, like Varlamore, for instance, have a much longer sort of impact, right? Like people are playing those for years to come. And so the sort of value we get out of spending loads of development time on it is sort of better in the long run. So these are kind of like very dry sort of things we need to think about. It's not as fun as coming up with great game ideas, but like it's things we need to get right for the benefit of Old School and the players.
Yeah. I I wonder, I mean, I don't know how much you were involved in Deadman modes. This is out of my knowledge. I never really played a Deadman mode, but I always watch them and I'm always like
Yeah.
excited to watch what's happening. Do you I also know Deadman modes are one of those things that I've heard other JMods on the cast talking about. It's like almost always a shit show when the actual tournament comes around. Like something always goes wrong. But like, what are your guys' plans for a potential like PvP temporary game mode? Is that in the cards?
But Deadman's obviously still going to be a thing.
Yeah.
We don't want to necessarily kill it. It's nowhere near obviously what it was when we first did it. We were doing it 4 times a year. It was
Yeah,
crazy. I think, to
wild.
be honest, I think in hindsight, that was a mistake. It
Mm,
killed the excitement about it because you don't. It's kind of one of those things that you don't know what you've got till it's gone,
yeah.
and it being there all the time, sort of, you're very happy to say, "I'll skip this one. I'll skip the next few. I'll play the one after that."
Yeah.
But when it's only once a year, you feel like, okay, I want to play this. There's a sort of bigger build up. There's more hype. More people play the single one, so you get more players in one tournament, which is good. I think that's best good thing for Deadman. Um, and also to the same arguments I was making about leagues, like it took a lot of time when we were doing it 4 times a year, and I don't think that was good for old school as a whole. But Deadman is the first thing to really show that sort of game modes and temporary game modes can work for old school. And it's amazing how much like people have played this game for 20 years. Being able to re-experience it in a completely different lens is amazing. Like we can repackage it with different rules, different structures, and it allows you to re-experience basically the same content in a completely different way. And that's really awesome. And Deadman was the first thing that really showed that we could do that. All of a sudden, things that didn't used to matter suddenly matter because it's an escape from a PK or whatever.
Yep.
But we want to keep Deadman going. In terms of like more specific details on plans, it's really learning and iterating as we go. The core ideas for Deadman work. We all try new things. Like last year, we brought in the breaches system where the monsters, the bosses would spawn. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I mean, it's a very simple goal is it spikes PvP traffic to one area, right? It creates the risk versus reward situation, and it creates spectacle for things people watching on streams. And these are the sort of things we're thinking about as well. But the thing we know we didn't get right is the finale. And as you just said, have we ever got the finale right? Not necessarily. When in the old finales, when it's worked, it's amazing. But when it's worked is sadly not very common.
It's still
Um,
it's still
and
it's still fun to watch as just the viewer. No matter what
yeah, I
happens,
mean,
like even when things go terribly wrong, it's content. So
I mean, absolutely is content for sure. What I feel sorry for, and it's not excusable really, is
yeah.
the players involved. Right? It's
Yep.
all well and fun for the people who aren't playing and they're just watching. It's
Yeah.
a good laugh. For the people who spent 2 weeks grinding 15
Yeah.
hours a day, it sucks if something goes wrong that screws you over, and it's on us to try and get that right. But there's a reason most competitive games don't do online tournaments,
Yeah.
and it's the same sort of reasons that affect us, whether it's network attacks or whatever. But a live event, it's like even one bug can cause a massive issue, um, and often that's all it takes is one small issue, and it's like we test it extensively. We could do big tests internally. We've done live betas, but like you still can't guarantee there's no bugs. There's no single issue that could just ruin things.
Yep.
And I think it's part of also why like because we do it's basically a knockout tournament, right? It's a bracket. Was how the Deadman finale was working. You'd basically get to the last 64, and then you'd basically fight 1v1s all the way down to a final. But like, it'd be better if it was a self-organized tournament where like, you go to Duel Arena, you set up the fight. If something goes wrong, you can just refight. The fact it was working via code and be sort of programmatically working out the tournament, I think that was a mistake ultimately. But it kind of, in the case of Deadman, it kind of almost had to work that way at the time. But I'm not ashamed of the fact we really tried to do something that cool and that awesome and create that spectacle because people were clearly interested. The viewership tells us that, and the amount of people that were watching those finales. We were doing live events. We had a studio audience and everything when we were doing some of these. It was amazing to that extent, and it was great that old school, a game that not necessarily anyone would really consider as like an I hate to use the word esport, but in that sort of territory at all, was able to do some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love us to be able to find ways to do it, but my stance on it really with the finales is like we need to try and avoid issues to the best of our ability and do things that are not risky, which sadly avoiding risk also kind of has to remove some of the spectacle, right?
Yep.
And so we'll keep trying to work on that and find a solution. But realistically, the more serious tournaments, if we do serious tournaments in the future, will probably want to be either LAN events where it's in person,
Yeah.
or sort of off, like as I say, sort of not programmed, where people can just go to like the PvP arena, have a fight, report their result, and we sort of run a tournament that way.
Yeah.
So maybe we can come up with something. I'm obviously keen for this. I think the competitive scene of proper competitions for PvP is really important because it gives those players something to be thinking about, something to be working towards. And I kind of say this aspirational element as well. It just as much applies to PvP because what are PvPers working towards on a normal day to day? And look, I'm not a PvPer. I've very little interest in going to the wilderness myself. It's not the sort of content for me. So I can't offer to be inside these players' heads and what they want, but I'll always try and understand it and listen to what they have to say. And I understand a lot of the frustrations over the years. But what are they working towards, right? You go to the wilderness every day, you're PKing people. Sure, it's fun. You have a good time in the moment. You get better kills. You maybe train and improve your own skills with respect to switching quickly or whatever it is. But what are you working towards?
Yeah.
To me, the answer to that question should be competitions, 1v1 knockout tournaments, clan v clan tournaments, like whatever it is. If we can get to a place where these things are happening, I think that'd be amazing. Personally, I'd love that to be a combination of community ran events, so sort of grassroots, like the community themselves organizing tournaments, with Jagex's support to help that happen, and also maybe the odd official event too. And I think that'd be an amazing place to have to get to. Whereas imagine if you have a big event twice a year, everyone kind of has that in the back of their mind that that's something I need to care about and work towards. I want to take part in that. I think that'd be amazing, but we're not there yet, and it obviously takes quite a lot of time and effort to create these things. But we have more PvP development going on than we have in a long time. Obviously, that was honestly part of the thinking from my point of view is bringing somebody like Manked in
Yeah, for
is
real.
is so good because we lack that experience in the team. There's not PvPers are a minority nowadays in terms of the wider community. It's quite hard to find somebody who's also a game designer, can also code, and bring them into the team
Yep.
to get that view. So like it's amazing to have someone like Manked who very publicly really wanted to do this role and put effort into learning it, and so that he could come in and do this job. And obviously, that's his game knowledge and experience in PvP was another big reason why we wanted to bring him in, and that's made a huge difference to what we've been able to do.
For sure. Okay, so one of the things you would mention, this is kind of changing topics. You mentioned on a Q&A, this is shortly after the Colosseum release, about, is it like, are we happy as a community with an invocation slash modifier mechanic for new pieces of content? You had mentioned that, and I don't know what the overall consensus is for the wider player base, but like, what are your thoughts on content having these sort of invocation systems?
I think we've learned that they don't necessarily work or it's very difficult to get them right. So balancing Tombs of a Mascot with all the different invocation options was incredibly tough. I know the team found that difficult. This obviously it's not even a case of like you either scale 1, scale 2, scale 3, or whatever raid level. It's any number of combinations, right? You could choose this invocation, or you could choose that one, or this one and that one, and we can't test all of those cases.
Yep.
Like, you got to come up with a bunch of ideas, and then you got to try and balance them with accordance to how difficult does this make the raid, and is that the right amount of raid level you get for it? There's all these there's all these considerations you're thinking of, and it makes it really difficult. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a raid that scales in difficulty and has options, but doing it via invocations, I mean, it's proven difficult. I mean, ultimately, you see today there's still loads of invocations a lot of people will try to avoid intentionally because they don't feel necessarily worth the raid level they get for it. And it took a lot of effort. And again, I hate to keep coming back to the same point, but like, time matters. And if invocations are going to take us loads of time to do, it would have been better for us to just release the raid without them and do another project, right?
Yeah.
And the raid would have also just still been good. So I think they're an interesting experiment, right? I don't regret us trying it because nowadays that remains one of the major identity things for Tombs of a Mascot.
Yeah.
Tombs of a Mascot will also always be different and always offer something that the other raids don't. Just in the same way Chambers of Xeric is very different with its sort of random layouts and the scouting stuff that goes on, to the fact that Tobs is very linear, curated experience. Like, they all are different, and I would advocate for every raid we do to offer something different. But in
I
hindsight, we probably shouldn't have done Invocations, in my opinion. It might be quite a strong opinion. I'm not sure everyone on the team would agree, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of when it comes to TOA, at least my thoughts on it, like I think it was just overall a net positive big time. It got a lot of players involved, and I don't know if that was, thanks to the invocation system, but at least it was something to bring out into the game to see if it works or not, because you would never know if you didn't bring it out. But when it comes to Colosseum, like I've messed around with the Colosseum, love it, by the way. Like I think Soul is like the best fight ever. It feels so good. Like the Soul fight just at the very end. That is such an amazing fight. Like I want something like that to be a standalone fight, and like
Yeah.
build on that, because that was fun. Like that is just genuinely fun. And maybe it's so fun because you have to go through the waves first, and then you just get this one-time experience. So maybe if it was just fully repeatable, just go back in, it wouldn't be, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have the same charm. But I guess, and the whole reason I bring up the Colosseum is because I wonder, and this is kind of stemming back to leagues as well, where you have these permanent choices, but instead of it being not punishments, but like downgrades or something, like this is going to be a hard mechanic like the invocations work, it would actually be a big buff. So the content, so I'm imagining, like a piece of content like Colosseum comes out that's very difficult, like way more difficult than the Colosseum is right now. But every few waves or something, or maybe even every wave, I would imagine every few waves though, you get a real good power up rather than a downgrade or something that's going to make it harder. Because as long as the content itself is ramping up very powerfully and it just becomes kind of overwhelming, it would be so cool to have these insane power-ups that kind of come along with it. So it doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel like you're choosing the least bad option. It feels like you're trying to choose the best of three really powerful options in a way. And I wonder, I don't know how that would exactly play out, and I don't know what you would choose for those power-ups, but that's something I feel like a lot of players have kind of hinted at, like something where it feels good choosing something rather than the least bad thing.
I think that makes a massive difference psychology-wise, right?
Yeah.
And it never feels like you're being punished or something's being taken away from you. I maybe could still see an argument for like, all right, I reach wave 3, I get offered a bunch of power-ups. I didn't get the power-up that's really fucking good because it's brokenly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to restart. Like, he still might
It's
get
true.
that component to it. But
Inevitably, yeah.
I would still think it's less of an issue than it is with the negative buffs, the
Mm-hmm.
debuffs. But like, I think it's more interesting personally. Um, I think we've seen the feedback with Colosseum, and we made a bunch of changes that I think have hopefully improved the situation from what it was.
Yeah,
But
it has.
I don't think anybody's really looking at Colosseum thinking, "Wow, I'm really glad we had this modifier system."
Yeah.
Like, I think most people would probably have the opinion that if we had just released it without them and balanced it for that, it would have been fine. It would probably be better. And that's not to say like criticize the team or anything for doing things. It's just we tried something, and I think we have to sort of take from it like, hey, we tried something, it didn't quite work, and that's fine. But I would never stop us from wanting to experiment and try different things because that's the lifeblood of the game. Like, no two pieces of content in Old School really ever feel quite the same. They all try to do something new or offer something different to other things.
Yep.
So yeah, I think buffs can probably work. In fact, like, I floated the idea, what if there was buffs and debuffs and you had to choose? And but that was really with the leaning into the glory system, and the idea that obviously like the more glory you have, that makes a difference for you. But that system didn't really ever quite get to the level we maybe initially thought of it. In that, to some extent, we were thinking, because people will want to maximize glory, some people who are good enough will quite happily pick modifiers that are bad for you because they come with more glory.
Yeah.
But glory just never was that important. I think it's very hard to make a piece of content that's trying to be kind of like the Inferno, right? This big challenge, aspirational. Beat it once, you get the awesome thing. Because so many people are going to go to Colosseum with the mindset of beat it once and never go back.
Mm-hmm.
While we were trying to also conflate this with, what if the Inferno was actually intentionally repeatable? Like, it's an activity you should grind because it has rare drops, just like a raid does, or just like a normal boss fight does. And we've tried to combine them, right? Like, there are rare drops at Colosseum. You can grind it. In fact, if you look up the GP rates, it's insane. Like, if you are capable of grinding the Colosseum, you stand to make a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And that's good, right? We kind of wanted to do that. But I kind of also get the sense not a lot of people wanted to do that either. A lot of people, it's very hard for us to make a boss fight that's simultaneously a super aspirational challenge that you kind of want to, it's so hard you beat it once, you kind of never want to do it again, but also be a boss that's good for grinding. And I think to your point about the boss fight being awesome and whether it works as a standalone, I don't know, but it's the same thing. If you fight a boss only once every half an hour, the needs for that boss are quite different to a boss you fight every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because by the time you kill a boss 500 times, it's very hard to keep on making that quite fun and enjoyable to do. I mean, I'd argue, realistically, no boss is very fun after you've done it 1,000+ times. Like, it's impossible, I think, basically, to create something that's that fun that many times. But
Soul's probably, I don't know. Like, it's pretty addictive.
Maybe.
But yeah, you're probably right though.
But there's some value to the fact you only see it every now and then.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with like quest bosses. You beat a quest boss like once, so it can do weird things that you would never put in a boss that you fight.
That's true.
As a grind. But hey, maybe there's something to learn from that. Like, obviously the team tried to do something quite different with Sol as well, and have more like reaction things, pay attention to what he's saying and react to it and so on.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. And I think you guys have experimented nicely with the DT2 bosses, Var Dorvis in particular, with the little red button smashing thing. Just kind of something that we've never seen before.
I love that.
Yeah, it's cool.
That, again, it's maybe a good explanation of kind of where my job sometimes sits. I said to Arcane, a lot of modern games use QTEs, like quick time events. Like it'll pop up on screen. You have like a timer going down, and you've got to press the X button on your PlayStation controller before it hits the end. A lot of people don't like them, and so on. But it's like, what could we take from that and apply to Old School? Like, we never use boss mechanics that use the interface. But what if we did? Because the game's one of the unique elements of Old School is its point and click. Obviously, most MMOs, you WASD movement, you're using a controller.
Yeah.
This is a unique difference for us. We can use the mouse. In fact, players regard switching equipment really fast, switching prayers, being accurate with your mouse movement is a skill that's important to Old School. And we use that in the boss fight. That was sort of my influence. It was then Arcane who went and then ideated and turned that into an idea that was what you see in Var Dorvis. So, like, it's not like I want to claim credit for it, because it isn't. It's just maybe an explanation of like some of the seeds of ideas that are in my head being shared with somebody who then went and turned that into reality. And that's often sometimes where I'm operating now. So like, I didn't come up with the rest of the boss fight, but there's ideas and stuff that I can still sort of influence into the game. But I love that. There's so much stuff that was smart about how Arcane did that. I love the fact it feels so satisfying. You can click them really fast, and it feels responsive. The fact you can eat while doing it as well, so it makes it a really optimal time to consume food or drink a potion and so on. Like, it's good, and we're gonna, maybe in 2040 we're gonna start to run out of ideas. But right now, we still keep seeming to be able to come up with new things we've never tried before in boss fights, despite the fact it's very easy to argue our combat system's super basic. It's so limited. But yeah, here we are. We still keep on coming up with new things to try. So I think there's something to be said for having a really constrained, like essentially we're in a box, right? There's a bunch of constraints, but within that box, we've got to try and be creative, come up with new things. And yet, I think it really does empower creativity. I think it's a lot harder to be creative when you're completely limitless.
Totally. Okay, so here we haven't even touched. Well, we actually have touched quite a few of the Twitter topics already, just based on things I've asked. But here's one in particular from Rafa D, who is also asking about the invocation system. But their second question is: any plans for endless mode at Colosseum? And also, just to add on to that, I feel like something that I love the Colosseum inside and out. I think it's actually just really well designed content. I think it's always easy to like nitpick little flaws, but overall I've been very satisfied with how it all turned out. But one of the things I feel like that was lacking was the kind of risk versus reward, where it is such a short piece of content where it never really feels appropriate to just cash out unless you actually just pull like the little glaive or whatever early on. You might as well just take it. But ultimately, it doesn't really feel like you're really risking too much. It just feels like you just want to get to the end of the fight regardless. So endless mode plus the sort of high risk, high reward is
high risk, high reward. Firstly, I mean, this is also coming from people in the team, maybe more than myself, but conversations I've had are like almost quite pessimistic to the fact that like, is it possible to do high risk, high reward in PVM in old school? And almost doubting whether we can, because obviously that was part of the aim, right? We wanted to create something that was meant you were gambling, but as you say, realistically, no one really cares about gambling the D legs they just rolled, and no one's going to risk the glaive they just pulled, right?
Yeah.
So like everyone, if you roll the rare drop, you're just leaving.
Yeah.
And if everything else you just don't give a shit about, you're just going, right? Like you're just gonna crack on because the rewards are there, right? The quiver's the only thing you're going for. So why do I care to quit because I've got a satisfying amount of D-legs? Like you just don't. But it's kind of a matter of fact. You can either beat it or you can't. Right? Like once you're good at Sol, there is no risk. Right?
Yeah.
Sure, there's maybe a slim chance you die. But like I don't know how we could insist on something that's inherently risky, and maybe except for those people who are on the verge of being good enough or not. But ultimately, there's going to reach a point where you're so well trained, you're so good at it, that you can just go forever. You can just keep doing it, and ultimately, you will keep on just getting alarmingly powerful amounts of rewards, perhaps, right? So it's really hard for us to balance in such a way that it isn't just so overpowered for the people who know it inside out, but also, yeah. So maybe an endless mode can just keep escalating the difficulty. But then is it satisfying, right? Like ultimately, do we just scale it infinitely so that you end up at a point that it's effectively impossible? Because maybe that's what people are imagining. I don't know if that's what people are imagining. You could imagine a mode where you just cycle through the waves again, like you beat Sol, you go back to wave 1, or it could be right. The wave after Sol is it wave 12?
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact number.
Yeah, 12 is Sol.
12. So then is it just like wave 11 but escalated? And then escalation and escalation and escalation? Like, is that good? Does it affect it? It'll essentially just reach a point where it's basically impossible, I presume, if we find enough monsters. So, like, I think there are consensus right now is like, we just don't really think it's actually that good an idea. Or that it can really work. Like, it's already the point of, it's already true today, as I say, like, if you want to make money at Colosseum, you can do that. And you can make up probably, I don't know what the exact rate is now, but like, you can make a lot of money, and it's got a GP rate better than most of the content. So, what's the point? Like, there's maybe a challenge component, an aspirational thing to like, I want to flex that I got to wave 31. But maybe the Colosseum isn't the right answer. I think you'd be better off designing a purposeful piece of content that is about being endless. And that probably doesn't mean it's got a final big boss like Sol. It's probably it's just wave sort of thing. But
you're right. That I don't think Colosseum is the place for it. And I think I think there is potential for an endless kind of thing. I think places I imagine, or something I would imagine that's not even wave based, but I'm imagining Awakened Vardorvis. I mean, you start off on Awakened Vardorvis and it's pretty mild. There's not much going. I mean, there already is a lot going on initially compared to the normal version, but by the end, I mean, there is so much going on, and you make one slip up and you die. So I even something that wouldn't be wave based, but just something as intense, and you have to have full concentration on something like Awakened Vardorvis that actually just goes on kind of endlessly in a way. Like it just keeps ramping up. So it's short enough. I don't know. Like, and it would be hard because if you're trying to make a sort of cash out system, that would be really hard because you want it to just continually get more and more intense, almost without breaks in a sense. I don't know. It would be interesting to see what you guys could design. And I know it's so hard because you have these select players in the game that would literally just make bills like if because they would just be so good. Right? Yeah.
If it's just for status, it probably works.
Yeah.
But risk versus reward, that's the bit that's probably hard to pull off. So like endless waves, get as far as you can, kind of like Call of Duty Zombies. Mm-hmm. Sure, right? Like you can almost just make that work just on status. But
I'm almost thinking this would be very harsh. But if you really wanted a high risk, high reward, what if you had to stake your own like GP into a coffer? So the longer it goes, your GP from your bank will actually be extracted if you die. So on top of, you could just kind of die whenever and you're just always making money. What if you're like genuinely risking your own GP that is in your bank to get a huge reward? So if you do die, like you're actually just losing tons of money. Like I feel like I don't feel like any normal player would want that, but I'm imagining for those like super giga chad gamers at PVM all day, like they would like to see something like that. It's hard to know if that's even something
spicy.
Yeah, no, I mean it would be amazing content to watch if you're really putting something on the line to do this, but ultimately
I think that's the space it probably sits, right? It ends up being something to watch. It's not something most people will play. And that's the problem with status, right? Like status isn't actually worth anything to your character.
You're right.
Some people will care about it. Streamers, top tier players might, but that's a niche. But yeah, I think it's got to be purpose built. And RuneScape have tried more stuff. They've done solo bosses in the last 10 years that have enrage mechanics that just go up and up and up. It ups the stats of the creature. It ups certain mechanics are introduced at certain enrage levels and so on. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they run into similar issues that people just master it so much that like it almost doesn't matter what the enrage is. People just start farming it for an insane amount of loot. And it's very difficult to put anything in without just being random, right? Like you could put some RNG in there where like there's just a chance it just kills you, but that's also not fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's difficult. I kind of feel it's not necessarily a priority for me to think, how can we do this? If we come up with the right idea or someone pitches something in a game jam that's like, oh my god, I think I've worked out a way to do it, then obviously it's the sort of thing we might experiment with. But I wouldn't want to commit to sort of any promises or indicate something that suggests we want to do it when at the minute I'd say we probably are of the other opinion that we just don't think it quite works.
Yeah, it's definitely tough, and I'm also like I don't envy your guys' position when it comes to designing content, because it's not like, I mean, for most players and the players that I hear from are usually higher level, and they're kind of wrapped up in their own sort of bubble with what RuneScape should be, which is just more and more difficult content. But for you guys as devs, like you are seeing hundreds of thousands of players and across all different levels and all different, just what they want to do in the game, whether it's questing or just skilling or role playing or whatever. Like you have a much broader perspective on like what is good for the game, and it's kind of a tough position to be in, I'd imagine, especially with the polling system and always getting like just continuously getting negative feedback on anything. Like no matter what, even if it was the perfect update, you're always going to get like negative feedback and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is the case. Like, people want different things. Not everyone wants everything. I mean, obviously, sailing as an e-skill is as divisive as you can get, right? With something as serious as an e-skill, but that's a good example. But the same is true of everything. It's just people care less, right? People are not as strongly opinionated about us doing the hunter rumor system as they are adding sailing. But there's plenty of people who are against it, the same way people are against sailing. So, because everything's got to try and take that balance. But to me, at a basic level, as long as we believe every project we do has a purpose, firstly, like, I think it should be pretty obvious to anybody in the team, every project we do, why are we adding this project? What's the problem it's solving, or what are we trying to get out of it? To me, that is important. So, like, to take that example, Hunter Rumors, there's an absolute abundance of dead Hunter content. It's been dead since it came out in 2006. Red Chinchompas as a core hunter method were just so much better than everything else, both GP wise and XP wise, that why the fuck is anybody going to actually go and do like
Deadfall
the Deadfall
Hunter.
traps?
Yeah,
Like, yeah. Or even Black Salamanders, like, even they're decent XP, but Chinchompas you get money out of.
Yep.
Or they're really good if you're an Iron Man. So, like, to be honest, Hunter's actually really impressive. You look at the Hunter skill guide, there's so much content. Oh my god, pitfalls, net traps, box traps, deadfalls, butterfly nets. Oh my god, there's so much variety. Tracking. God, no one does tracking.
Nope.
But it's all pointless. So essentially, if you go back to 2006, whoever was working on Hunter spent loads of development time making all these things, and then no one played it.
Yeah.
That's bad for Jagex. That's bad for players. So we need to understand why we're adding something. Hunter Rumors knew they were trying to solve that problem. All of a sudden, in one fell swoop, there is now a reason why you might go and do tracking. You might do Deadfall and so on, because they're all attached to this system. The other problem it was solving is Hunter is utterly, I think this is a testament of where we made a mistake. Birdhouses are overpowered, and they dominate the whole skill. Completely, right? Like, who's training Hunter when you can just go do a birdhouse run every hour, get loads of nests and seeds out of it, and not have to put in much effort at all? Your effective I can't remember what the effective XP rate is, but, like, you know, you spend 5 minutes on a run and you get a shit ton of XP.
Yeah.
It probably works out to several 100k XP an hour or something.
Yeah,
Why am I going to go do regular Hunter?
It was going to be even more OP initially. I remember some discussions, and then we realized the effective XP per hour was going to be way too busted.
Totally. And I still think a mistake's been made. And this is the problem with a live product, right? Like, if we're pre-launch and we haven't launched this yet and no one's playing it, it's very, very easy for us to just fix that.
Yeah.
But we're not. We have hundreds of thousands of players who've already done birdhouses and used these methods to train Hunter. It's very hard for us to wind it back without pissing a lot of people off. And so it's like, then the question is, should we? Should we just go and half the XP birdhouses offer? I mean, it's very easy to argue that you should, but there's plenty of reasons why we feel very, very afraid of doing that sort of thing. Not because it's the wrong or right thing to do, but because it's a live game. We have to respect that people have already put time into this, or that people are planning to put time into it, and that means we have to be more conservative changing existing things. But Hunter Rumors can come in and genuinely offer a viable alternative that people might feel is worth their time.
Yeah.
Yes, they don't necessarily compete on XP alone, but they offer other things that you might care about. So the other tangible rewards. Now, in theory, you could do both. You can do Rumors and unlock the other stuff whilst you do birdhouse runs. Like, there's a viable option there now, and it also contributes to the end game of Hunter as well, where basically everybody training 90 and 99 Hunter was either doing Herbivore or Red Chinchompas.
Yep.
Now there's a third option, and these things can appeal to more people. And so, with most of the skilling updates we do, I can put it into the same argument. We're looking to add variety. People want different things. You know, you mentioned like the Hexus podcast, like high level community have a very different take on the game than casual players.
Oh yeah.
Neither are right, neither are wrong. They just want different things. They like different things. They enjoy different things. That's fine. We want to embrace that. But how do you embrace that? Well, to me, that's offering variety.
Mm-hmm.
So for like woodcutting, it's perfectly fine for two-tick teaks to exist alongside redwoods, as long as they're balanced fairly. So like the intensity of teaks is good, and it means that it can offer a higher XP rate. While with redwoods, it's super AFK, so it needs to offer a much lower XP rate. Arguably, still, it's too high, to be honest, in that example. But that's generally how I'm looking at things. Like, as long as they're balanced right across the sort of three key things: XP, reward, or GP rate, and how intense it is, or how AFK it is, then you're fine. And these methods can exist alongside one another. And Hunter Rumors also does that. It adds to that set of options with Herbivore, Reg Enchampers, and Rumors, and you get something that will satisfy more people. That's good. We don't want people to be blocked off from skills because they hate it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want disliking it or it being unfun to be the reason that people don't want to play the skill.
There's actually something you mentioned, like the sort of like intensity and kind of sort of got to find a balance. One of the things I've seen lately is the higher, more intense skilling content is profitable. So the Hallowed Sepulchre is a perfect example of just a wonderful piece of content, super engaging, super fun, rewarding XP and GP. And Hunter Rumors, kind of have that. And one of the things that's kind of fallen behind though, and even fishing, but mining particularly is kind of like in this weird thing where the higher intensity you go up, you aren't making as much money. And I feel like there's kind of like this backwards thing where that used to sort of be the case. And like the sort of the mentality behind the player base was like, yeah, the higher intensity, you shouldn't be profiting. It was somewhat related to Slayer as well. If you wanted to efficiently
Yeah.
slay back in the day, you weren't making money. But nowadays, I feel like we've kind of turned that. And I feel like mining and even some fishing methods have kind of fallen behind where I feel like the higher intensity methods should also offer high GP as well.
Really, like the way I'd sort of explain it is that you got those three different elements, right? You've got XP rate, AFK, how AFK it is, and also then the GP rate, how much money are you making from it?
Mm-hmm.
I argue I use sort of metaphor like you've got three light bulbs, you've only got so much power. Which light bulbs do you like shine the brightest? And so they're all a trade-off. And that's the way to sort of compare the methods. So Zalcano could arguably, it's not the most intense thing in the world, but like somewhat high intensity, extremely low XP rate, very strong on GP. Granite is really intense, super high XP rate, nothing on GP. So like you're still getting something out of it,
Mm-hmm.
XP. Like the thing I think with money from skilling generally is things struggle to make money if they're offering good XP because loads of people are going for 99. If loads of people are going for 99 and loads of people choose a method that gives loads good XP and money, it's going to stop making money because so many more of those resources come into the economy and get sold on the GE. So there's a difficulty there unless we're just dropping loads of alks and GP directly.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be challenging. I would love to make more monetary things for skilling because I think it does lack, and PVM's very much left it in the dirt. But it's very much because we rarely offer things that don't give XP. I think that's a big part of it. Um, Things like double natures for runecrafting still fairly profitable, but just not compared to what you can get from killing Vorkath or something.
Yeah.
But I think that one difference is obviously part of it's on us and balancing these things better and properly, but also it's PVM's also always got this element of, well, the only reason you're doing it is money. You're not really doing it for XP. You're doing it if you're other than if you're like an Iron Man or a Sea Logger, you're doing it just for money, and that's most people. So like it either makes money or it doesn't. If it's not making money, you're not going to do it, generally speaking. So it's such a different dynamic that's hard for us to deal with, I think.
Yeah.
But I'd love to find ways to make skilling more profitable. And you're totally right, right? The more intense methods are the ones that would warrant being more profitable. Funnily enough, like for mining, granite gives you nothing, but AFK Motherlode Mine gives you something. It doesn't give you a lot, but it gives you something.
We really could. I mean, I think it fully is justifiable to have any method that becomes more effort should also give the same sort of GP. I mean, we already see it with red Chinchampas, black Chinchampas, Sepulcher. I feel like there always is some sort of way to make the high intensity skilling profitable in some way. The other thing is, and I always hesitate to even mention this because it's kind of become a meme at this point, but when it comes to tick manipulation, having to abuse these weird things like herb tar and knife log and stuff to start these actions where in my head I'm just thinking there is actually a lot of fun to be had with these tick manipulation methods, but it doesn't come from the amount of clicks you're doing. It comes from the rhythm and the flow, the satisfaction of predictable resource extraction, just anticipating the next XP drop and just feeling like you're in this good rhythm. We could have rhythm, and I've mentioned the idea of like a gnome cube, something that just starts a skilling action in one click. I think Madalena brought up something in like a blog post talking about rhythmic skilling in the future that I'm really excited about, but I wonder if the team,
Yeah.
I don't know, sees that at all.
I want us to be able to explore more high intensity skilling methods, and that good high intensity would be more rhythmic, right? The
Mm-hmm.
thing I dislike about tick manipulation is how it's very much in the same category as like heads, skipping at Olm, right? It's not a really, it was never intentional. No one intentionally created that, and because of that, it's not obvious that that's how it works. It's utterly ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Why on earth would why on earth would these actions let you mine more quickly? It makes zero sense to a player who doesn't know about it already. And you need to kind of intimately know how the game's working under the hood to even get a grasp of why the hell it works.
Yeah.
That's the element I don't like. Obviously, the good sides of it is we've got some really interesting rhythmic gameplay that some people find really satisfying. How can we recreate that in an intentional way that makes sense? So, maybe you're right. We should introduce something like a magic gnome cube, which does the same thing, but is transparent about that's what it's for,
Yeah.
and that maybe would help more people feel like it's something to get to grips with and understand. But largely, my attitude has been I don't want to take away any of the tick manipulation things that happen, but generally, we should be more intentional about the things that we create in future that try and create intense gameplay, but in a very intentional manner rather than what we have there. Um, and it's coming up with the right ideas. It's coming up with stuff that works and can do the same sort of process. And we haven't really focused on it, in all honesty. And maybe it's something we should do more. I know this, like you mentioned, Elena and other people in the team have been coming up with ideas for and trying to come up with ways we can do it. But we've just not quite got around to really actually executing on these things. We still have to answer the question: is where do they sit? What skills do we target with them?
Yeah.
What level range should they aim for? Should they replace the existing methods? Should they be better than the existing methods? For instance, like obviously mining's already got granite. Should we do something else for mining? It's like where would you put it? How fast should the XP rate be? Should
Yeah.
it be better? It needs to make a choice. Is it better or worse than granite? And that's a difficult question to answer. So it's like it comes back to that sort of principle: is what's the purpose of what we're adding, and we need a clear one. So like maybe mining's fine; it's already got a method, and we should be looking at another skill to come up with something that can achieve something similar. But yeah, it is something that's been on our minds, and people in the team want to do this because we've probably more naturally been focused on the sort of earlier problem that I was talking about. Rune crafting isn't fun for a lot of people. We introduced Guardians of the Rift that helped solve that problem. Hunter was not fun. Loads of people hated Hunter. Loads of people were demanding we improve it. Hunter Rumors helps with that. We haven't necessarily focused on giving people the more high intense options, and it comes with some controversy in that a lot of people are not interested. We would love to have pathway for more people who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves as ever wanting to do granite, or certainly tick manip granite, as giving them a pathway to sort of get to grips with more intense activities and start to enjoy that kind of thing. So I would love us to do more. And sort of maybe you can look at like, I don't know if you've played much Perilous Moons, or it's not
Yeah.
necessarily in the same spirit, but like the fishing activity going on there was a sort of attempt to come up with what's a more high intense version of the basic fishing formula that could give you more ways to play. It's just this quick little interaction, but it was a bit of an experiment that I know we did very intentionally to see how do people respond to that. It's not exactly a training method, it's mostly there just for the Perilous Moons activity, but it lets us sort of see how people respond to it. Maybe we can take something from that.
And I think what is so good about that is like it's not just about the intensity. I feel like the intensity is like the last thing that's that's not offering what's actually fun about it. Like if I were to imagine 3-tick granite and get rid of the knife log, just make it so it's one click, and also don't have your inventory fill up dramatically fast. So you're just spamming, dropping everything in between each 3-tick action. Like that is the thing that's not as fun. Now, obviously it's subjective. There's some players that have spent hundreds of hours doing it, and so they kind of maybe are a little bit biased and say, no, it needs to stay that way. I did it the hard way. But ultimately, like the rhythm you can get into, if there wasn't as much drop, if there was no dropping at all, and it was just a one-click thing, and you're going in this nice cycle, getting good XP drops, and I feel like that alone, even though it'd be a very simplistic skilling method, it's very basic, I feel like the flow of it in the rhythm would actually like kind of entice a lot of people to do it. I feel like there's too many. The negative things are literally just how many clicks you need to perform every few seconds, and just the sheer amount of dropping, which for almost every player is just unbearable on the wrist if you're trying to be efficient. That's not fun. Yeah, but even with the shift, even with the shift clicking, I mean, after 20 minutes of it, like everybody's wrist is burning if you haven't done a lot.
100%. Yeah, some people love it, and we see that, right? It's like, and I find it remarkable. I would never do these things as a player myself.
Yeah,
right?
most people would never do it.
Not
either.
at all.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you create methods like this that can appeal more to more people and get more people interested? I think one philosophy that's sort of been on my mind for a while is we should design content like this to have natural breaks.
Yes.
And not breaks that, because obviously in theory you can be doing granite and just take a break, right? Mm-hmm. But it feels bad because I'm losing efficiency. I want to be going it. Mining takes long enough. I don't want to bloody stop for every 10 minutes for a break. And it's, the other feeling I think people get is, my God, I'm putting so much effort in, and I'm still only getting like 140k or whatever it is. Like, it's just, it feels like you're going so hard for 3 hours, and then you look at your XP and you're like, God, I'm only a third of the way to the next level. Like it feels shit because you've been so actively giving attention to it.
Yeah,
I think breaks built into the game design that are not inefficient to take are a really good thing, and it's something I would like us to explore, which we haven't necessarily yet.
You nailed it with Guardians of the Rift, by the way. Thank God those rocks don't deplete either. Like that honestly was so brilliant of you guys to just make it so you mine for 2 minutes at the beginning of each round. Like that feels so good.
It's the ups and downs, right? The ups and downs and intensity are so good. It's like, is Guardians of the Rift intense? Is like Volcanic Mine intense? And like, they both have ups and downs. Volcanic Mine's actually remarkably AFK, but then has periods of you need to pay attention and do a lot.
And it's predictable.
None are in the same. None of them are quite the same rhythmic thing that goes on at Granite.
Yeah.
But like, maybe something like aerial fishing. It's not necessarily a popular method, and I think it's balanced wrong, and that's part of it. But like aerial fishing, maybe some people have done it for C-Log more than XP. Is sort of, again, it's like a joint hunter fishing method, and it's similar to falconry. You're using a bird to catch fish in the lake, and that's quite rare. Make you constantly clicking on spots and having to maybe drop or cut up the fish in your inventory, and that was very much in this vein, right? Of
Hmm.
trying to create something like that is very intentionally designed, rather than using like a pestle and mortar or whatever bullshit you brought with you to Dickman it. This was
Yeah.
intentional.
Yep.
But no one really does it. I think that's part of balancing, but a lot of people, it is awful. It's the same. It suffers from the same issue. It's so intense. But like to give an example, what if every 3 minutes a whopper of a fish appeared? Like imagine a huge fishing spot, like 5 by 5 appears, and you use that, and you click on that. Your bird goes after it, but you get 30 seconds of AFK.
Yep. That's brilliant. It would be, I mean, even if we're just looking at granted example, if there was a rare chance where, rocks are depleting over time, and then all of a sudden you hit a rock and it's like, oh, hey, this is a mega rock, so
Yeah,
you can
this
sit
is a
here for
juicy
30.
rock.
Yeah, you can sit here for 30 seconds to a minute chilling, and it's almost like predictable in a way. Like this is going to happen every
Yeah.
couple minutes.
You can make it an exact cycle if you wanted, not
Yeah,
even any randomness.
that usually is actually the way better route to go when you know almost like you would actually see how many more swings you have until it hits, so you can actually just
Yeah,
fully anticipate like I need to go pee really quick, but I'm just going to wait until I know
yeah.
exactly when this rock's going to
And,
spawn.
and because of that, we could make it good XP. It's still worth doing, um, so that you don't feel bad about taking that break, essentially.
Yeah.
And that still gives you a time for the very human things most players are wanting, right? The ability to reply to their friend on Discord, the
Yes.
ability to browse the internet or change what Netflix show they're watching, like whatever it is. People do want breaks, and it's very, very difficult to consistently do tick manip teaks, tick manip granite, and do it for hours straight. The top end players who really are into this stuff and love it can, but I'm sure even they know they're the sort of exception in these situations. So, like, would they welcome more people being able to go into their scene because we create stuff like this? I'd hope so. But these could be gateways, right? Like you provide gateway activities that can help get people get into that sort of spirit of enjoying this sort of thing,
Hmm.
and hopefully that can help. But I like that philosophy in design. I would say this applies to lots of things though, even on different scales. Like an agility course. For me, the best agility course has one obstacle that takes a lot longer than the others. So to look at RD, why do people like RD? Well, it's got that fairly long obstacle at the end where you're jumping across the market stalls. Again, same reason. It's a chance to take a drink. It's a chance to eat some food. It's a chance to reply to a message. Like it's a chance to just take your hand off the mouse for just 5-10 seconds,
Yep.
and that's good. It doesn't mean the rest of it can't be intense and require you to click quite quickly, or have intricate gameplay that means you can get more efficiency out of it. But I think that's smart for us to think about those sort of things when we're designing skilling things. And it's quite nuanced. It's not the sort of thing that would naturally come to mind when you're designing an agility course, but if you're really thinking about the sort of psychology element of it, I think these things can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's cool though. You guys are exploring a lot of different methods when it comes to skilling, and I'm always excited about like what the new skilling activities are going to be, how you guys are going to improve on you know
Yeah.
existing content. I think you guys are doing a great job, and I think you guys also. I mean, just hearing you speaking for the last few minutes, like you guys sound very aware of what the players really want, and trying not to one of the philosophies early on in RuneScape was like the more tedious and masochistic a grind is, like that is like what we thrive off of. Like we want just the total hell of skilling, like that's what's respectable about it. And I feel like we've completely moved on from that, and like we're trying to make the game fun ultimately rather than just adding tediousness for the sake of it.
Yeah, I'd say it's in everyone's best interest to want as many people to play the game as possible,
Yep.
right? The success of Old School is amazing for everybody. It allows us to bulk up our team, it allows us to do more content, and it also means the game will be around forever. I see no reason why Old School is going away anytime soon, right? The game's thriving, I've seen people talk about how we're in a golden age and stuff, and I totally buy into that. We're at more players than we've ever had.
What,
11 years later. Not many games can say that. Why is that? I think it's because we are being very careful about the things we choose to do. We are responsive to the community and we'll listen. If they tell us we're getting things wrong, we'll listen and adjust it. And that's so important because we need to make sure the game's looked after. Because I wanted to be here in 2040. I might not even be at Jagex in 2040. I don't know. That's so long away.
yeah,
But I'd
that's
very much like Old School to still be a thing. So it's important we look after it and
do
and do provide it that direction.
do you guys worry about bringing in new players? I mean, I just watched what was it, Jimmy's video talking about MMORPGs in general and how people most like making a new MMORPG is just the most like fruitless endeavor basically at this point. Like
Yeah.
it takes so much to take other people that like MMOs away from their main MMO, and also there's very few new players besides like little children basically at this point that would even care to get into an MMO. Like if you really want to get new players, you have to like indoctrinate them basically at a really young age, which is something Old School ended up doing. We have all these like 8 and 9 year olds on the internet early in the day, and so we all get hooked on this game. But do you guys
It's
have any plan for like new players coming in?
I we do get some. Um, Obviously, the vast majority of our audience are people who've known RuneScape for a long time. Maybe they haven't even played it in the past, but they're familiar with it or have played other MMOs and so on. But it's not to say we don't get any new players. It's never been our focus, I would say. There's a lot of our effort has just been how can we just keep making the game better? And a lot of this stuff pays off long term. So it's like projects we added 5, 6, 7 years ago are benefiting us today because the game's better. The skills are more welcoming. There's more variety. There's more awesome quests to participate in. There's more reasons to level up and progress. And so when a new player comes into the game today, I always want the answer to be it's better to join today than it was yesterday, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it should always be getting better for new players as a game, as a proposition. The thing we've not put a lot of time into, although we've dabbled, is upgrading things like the tutorial, early game stuff, and really trying to help that element. Ultimately, that's so hard, and to all your points about MMOs and everything, it is so hard to find people who really, really want to play this kind of game. Um, I think part of it's been very zeitgeisty. The mid 2000s were the heyday, or even earlier than that, were the heyday for MMOs, and
Yeah.
it's not really in the same position today. And I don't think there's anything necessarily in our power to change that. And old school is old school. Like, it's in the name. We can't necessarily depart from what it is at its core.
Yeah.
It needs to remain recognizable to what it proclaims to be in its name, right? You can't join and find Lumbridge as a totally different city now, right? Like it'd be ridiculous. It wouldn't. The name of the game is Old School RuneScape. If it stops being recognizable to what you think of as Old School RuneScape, then it's failed. So we need to maintain that, but it's not to say there's no gains in improving tutorial. Like it's these are the sort of things that are so sort of very simple, really. But like we get a number of new players coming into the game. We maybe keep say X% of them. If we make the tutorial better, if we make the early game better, we help people to find help or find communities to join. Maybe we can make that X plus 5%, right? And you keep more of them, we'll have more new players. That's not necessarily changing the amount of people who try it. It's just keeping more of them. So there's stuff like that, but these things that take a lot of effort. RuneScape has tried a lot of different tutorials over the years. I wouldn't say any has really fundamentally made a humongous difference to how many new players are coming in. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. Um, and to me, old school has obviously been successful. We've been growing a lot. What we're doing is working. So I don't necessarily think we need to go and suddenly rock the boat. Things like putting old school on mobile, that's been huge.
Yeah.
Like it gets it in the front of more people. It makes the game more accessible. More people who don't necessarily have the time to sit at a PC all day long, having access to the game, even if it's just to do casual activities. It keeps people who are already playing. It gives you a reason to engage more when you're not at home or whatever. Maybe there's things like that. Localization. Like, what if we like Old School's in English, and only English.
Yeah.
RuneScape isn't. RuneScape's in a few other languages. What if we did that? Does that help? Would that allow more people to play who would be interested in this kind of game? Quite possibly. So, like, there's all sorts of interesting things we can do that might help Old School get to new players. And it's not to say it's ever going to be, oh my god, take over school libraries and all sorts like it did back in the day. Because I think that era of MMOs is long gone.
It's over.
But it's not to say we can't find new players, essentially.
Yeah. Okay, here's a topic from Twitter from Strider. He's asking, with the heated discussion over Fasani's nightmare drop rates for project rebalance and popularity of clogging, has there been discussion on the team of standardizing drops or hours of completion time relative to the difficulty of content and power level? Fasani's nightmare and chambers are still long and bloated tables.
Oh man, this is obviously it's a hot topic, as you say, if we've just been talking about it. And we've obviously shared our recent blog and where we're going with it, and ultimately where we've pitched and settled is a bit of a compromise. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's kind of the compromise that kind of satisfies nobody, but
I think it's pretty satisfactory for most players. Obviously, it's not going to satisfy everyone, but I think you guys, at least the transparency on the blog, I'm pretty satisfied with it.
Like, it helps,
yes,
right? There's no doubt it doesn't help.
Big help.
It has made a huge amount less hours.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie and say it's where, like, if we were releasing it today, we wouldn't balance it like that. Yeah. But this is the cost of it being out for years already.
Yeah.
I think a huge part of Old School is that, like, we need to respect people's achievements. We don't want to ever disrespect people's time and so on. And, you know, we don't necessarily want the game to be a million times easier tomorrow than it is today. Easier being it's sort of air quotes, because, I mean, it's not necessarily easy, it's just longer, right? But it's people have already done the grind. And I know people will sort of debate this as like the sort of trolley problem, right? Like, do you keep running the train over loads of people, or do you pivot it to just run over one? It's challenging. The thing that feels so wrong to me is, like, it's tradable. I'm not necessarily fussed about the sea loggers and so on. Sea logging is amazing. What a great addition it's been for us. And loads of people care about it, and loads of people want to do it. But at the end of the day, most people are. That's not most people. Most people aren't doing it for sea. I mean, to be fair, actually, most people probably are doing Fasani's for sea log, or because they're an Iron Man. But generally speaking, in the community, most people aren't sea loggers.
Yeah.
Most people are choosing not to do Fasani's because it just doesn't feel worth their time, while other bosses they choose to do. And so you're left with the only people doing Fasani's being sea loggers, because it doesn't appeal to the normal player. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't appeal because it just doesn't, you know, the drops are so rare that you're generally going to go there and just get nothing out of it. Or you have to go there for so long to see that reward. But at the end of the day, the debate we've got is not necessarily about Iron Man time. It's not necessarily about sea logger time, because, sure, what the previous sea loggers have spent hundreds of hours there, and a future sea logger might only need to spend a lot less time. I think that's whatever. We can maybe sign it off and say, yeah, not the end of the world. But these things are tradable. They're worth so much money on the GE. It seems unfair to me to just, essentially, because it's so drastically out, right? It's not like it's close to the right drop rate, where it'd be fine. But, like, you probably have to triple the rates.
Yeah.
Or more. And so, like, the harmonized orbs, I'm just looking at 420 mil on the GE right now. Mm-hmm. If we tripled the rates, in theory, it goes down to 100 and something. Is that fair on the people who own it?
Yeah.
It's a massive impact on the, like, economic side of it. We have to obviously think about how powerful the equipment is, what price it should have based on how powerful it is, and so on. But maybe the harmonized orb is sort of the right power level that it's not a problem if it's 100 mil, something from that regard. It's the impact on the players who own it. It's just so unfair that a player who owns the orb today can just get screwed. And you would hate to be that person. And obviously most people aren't that person. Most people don't necessarily have one and they're thinking, I want to do Nightmare. I want to go and sea log it. I'm an Iron Man. I want to go and get Inquisitors.
Yeah.
Of course, from a more selfish perspective, you definitely want it changed. And rightly so.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough because, well, one, like they're making, you guys are making the elemental weaknesses change, which is going to just straight up make the harmonized orb a pretty valuable thing. And the way I see like these drop tables, because you're totally right, they would literally have to like triple the drop rates at least to make them in line with what should be the case for like a piece of content like Fasani's. And like, so I'm satisfied with what you guys have done, because ultimately the transparency you led on the blog was just saying like, hey, we want to respect people's time. I'm one of those players that spent, over 1,000 hours at this place. Not Fasani's, but normal solo Nightmare. Jesus Christ, not fun. And so I'm definitely a player that would be one that should be complaining like, hey, don't touch the drop rates or whatever. But I just see the game. I want to, and I, maybe some places I'm more biased than others, but ultimately I've almost completed Nightmare entirely, and I've gotten all the drops from Chambers, and both of those places I feel like are just so egregious when it comes to drop rates. Like they're just way too absurd. And I feel like if we look at a more broad perspective of this game, eventually we're going to get to a point where Chambers items are not the best in slot items. Like that's inevitable. Like we're going to, by the year 2030, are those still the best in slot items? Surely not. And with Fasani's, we've already seen the items not be as valuable because, there's Torva now and other items. And I'm just looking at it long term. We should just make a straight up change to the drop rates that makes sense looking at the game in the year 2030 or 2035. Like, do we really have to have these ancient pieces of content still dogmatically placed at 1,000-hour completions? Like, just that is so ridiculous. And I feel like you're right with the economy. I would actually argue that's like the least important thing. I mean, even with the Elder Mall change that's happening, I mean, that's I don't know what the Elder Mall is worth. What is the Elder Mall worth right now? Jesus, that thing's skyrocketed.
Things going up feels less like harmful to anybody, right?
Yeah.
Sure, there might still be people who've just sold one and feel like really upset that they've not held on to it. But it feels better to like the comparison is some people gain versus some people are losing. And with the harm staff or harm or people losing, not necessarily some people gain and some people miss out. So like I still think there's part of me that's like, should you just rip the band-aid off and say, yeah, look, some people are going to suffer right now, but you understand why, and in 2040, 2030, whenever, the long-term benefit is obviously worth it. But yeah, I mean, I think the compromise is hopefully trying to find sort of a good bot that still helps but doesn't completely rip up the other elements of it. Because I think you're right. It's certainly from a C-log perspective and time perspective, people are very much probably on the same page. Most people who've done it are probably well aware of how painful the grind was, and don't think it's right to see more people go through it. And maybe there's an argument that most people who own a harm orb aren't fussed about 200 mil.
Yeah.
Or 300 mil.
No, and
like it's not the sort of item most people go for immediately, right? T-bows and things like that are the priority. So
the thing I also wonder is, we've made a compromise now. So instead of like a 1 in 167 drop rate, I think it's like a 1 in 115 or something around there. And I still feel like a couple years down the line, even after this, update happens, I almost feel like inevitably there's going to be another buff to the drop rates because it's still out of control. And maybe that's actually the way to go, is like slowly increment it down so people aren't like just getting absolutely just
lower it by 1 a day. So
yeah, pretty much. And the same thing with Chambers, like, and chamber, honestly, with both of the, if you're buffing drop rates, I see it as a net positive when they're so egregious, because it is so much more fun. It would be literally so much more fun doing chambers if the drop rates were just straight up doubled across the board. Every single thing is twice as common. Like, yes, that would affect the economy initially, but ultimately it would just be like supply and demand would somehow equalize. It would be fine ultimately. You know, if the prices really did drop, then people wouldn't be doing the content as much, which means the prices would go back up to a normal price. Whatever happens, but it just feels so much better getting drops. Like, just it feels so much better. And Fasani's, if the drop rate, if you guys were to just make the drop rates like 1 in 50, literally over triple it, yes, it would be a huge impact initially. Some people would be butthurt, but like, oh my God, it'd feel so much better playing that content. And this is coming from somebody that would have just lost, 600 hours or something. And I wouldn't even care, because it would just feel so much better playing the content.
Yeah,
you're right.
It's a tricky trade-off.
It is a trade-off, and that's why ultimately it's like I respect what you guys have decided on doing, and I'm glad that you guys are also aware that for the future, maybe not make lottery drop rates.
Yeah,
you guys learned that initially, I think.
Yeah, it's something we try to think about, like going into like games where mascot balancing. The question we're almost asking ourselves is, how often do we want people to see a drop? So to sort of the fun of playing the content, and stuff like that. So like these things have been thought about. The thing is, like, it's so difficult thinking about things like C-log and like hours to completion is something people bring up, and obviously I've been with the Fasani stuff. It's like, but from a different perspective is, do we want Iron Man versus and C-logging communities to sort of dictate how rare and common things should be? I think there's certainly good arguments to say that these things shouldn't be absurd.
Yeah.
But you can also argue things like, well, is it a good thing or a bad thing that third age is as extreme as it is? Right?
Yeah.
We know from that perspective, realistically, outside of any extreme scenarios happening, it's going to be very, very difficult for anybody to ever fully complete the collection log, right?
Yep.
Because of that. And we obviously were aware of that. We separated the categories out even in the collection log. But is it a bad thing that those exist? I would argue no, because that's amazing. That's why the clue trails are so exciting to even the average noob. Is they're doing Slayer and oh my God, I get a hard clue. Let me go and do that. Just because of that slim chance they hit the absolute jackpot. And that's great. I think that's a good thing to have in the game. It's actually the introduction of the collection log that's actually been the first thing to really challenge that. And actually say, okay, should everything be obtainable by a single player? Because, well, actually, you come back to it, it's not a single player game. Old School is an MMO.
Yep.
You can everybody can get access to these things. You just have to buy them. So it's, there's nothing stopping you having the full reward set from Nightmare or the full reward set from Clues. You just use the economy to do so, because across millions of players, someone's got one. And it's this conflict between being MMO and having some things that are balanced for that and some things that are balanced for single player that conflict with things like C-Log and Iron Man.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's important to have the kind of rare items, the third age, the pets, the potentially jars. I don't know how much people care about jars and stuff, but like and like cosmetics, there's certain things where those should be the long-term hours. I just feel like building out, like, adding to your arsenal of weapons and gear, like just traditionally just, getting an upgrade to weapons normally, like nothing should be super egregious. I feel like the people that really want to take the game crazy and go for third age and pets and things like those, I feel like are justified being as rare as they are, and those can always be the things that people strive for later. But normal gear, like, I don't know, like Nightmare and stuff, it's just out of control.
I mean, let's be frank, like people who get all pets, that is an absurdity.
It is. I play this game a lot and I'm only at half.
Yeah, we never intended people to do that, of course.
Yeah.
For there to be an awesome thing that people get, and people love pets. The average Joe likes pets. The people who want to hunt them all like pets, and that's great. It's been great, and collection log's been amazing in itself for like it's added a new activity for people to do end game, and once you're max, you start to do start to run out of things to do. So like things like combat achievements and collection log and who knows whatever else we come up with in future. Like these things are great in terms of giving people directed goals still, despite the fact you've already played the game so extensively. I'd actually put things like Iron Man and so on in the same category. It's that like, everyone knows the same story. You back to your main account, then you play an Iron Man. Maybe you play a Grip Iron Man and so on. But this is good is that it extends the game for you. It gives you more content to play. It gives you more directed goals and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. But yeah, pets. I mean, God. And we'll continue to add more, but it's kind of weird. We have this weight on us, essentially, to say all pets should be about the same amount of hours to obtain. It's crazy that the Master Clue pet takes a lot longer than the others.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it's like, it's such an arbitrary decision, right? Like, we can make a pet as rare as we want, in theory. Like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's nice that some pets could maybe be more prestigious than others. But because of the collection aspect, a lot of people find it annoying that that's the case. So, like, these things conflicting all the time. And, at the end of the day, that's our job, right? We have to try and deal with these different interests and these our own. We have our own reasons and desires for what we want to do and achieve with things, and then there's different players who want different things from it as well. At the end of the day, it's probably quite harmless for pets to be similar sorts of hours to obtain as each other, at least certainly going forward. But
yeah, it's
like even things like the evil chicken outfit, like it's kind of just a stupid, funny thing. But
see,
it's amazing how such a stupid little cosmetic can piss off a community, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, Evil Chicken was an example of something that shouldn't have been changed because it is so pointless. Like, it was so I was so upset. And this is coming from somebody that literally it only benefits. I still don't have any evil chicken. So all the changes that were made directly benefit me into getting it easier. But I was upset for the players that got it super, super early and lucky. And now it's just a complete devaluation. Like people can just grind it, or I don't know what exactly happened to forestry. Maybe they've changed it now at this point, but at some point, people could just grind out evil chicken in a week if they really care to.
It's easier to get eggs. That's the difference, I think. It's not that the rates didn't change, right? It's just easier to get eggs.
And that was a piece of content that actually shouldn't have been changed. I like the birdhouses. That was a slight little change, a slight little buff, but the forestry went out of control, and that was unnecessary because ultimately it's completely useless armor. It's just for flexing. So I was totally okay with that being super rare. So, but I want to hear your thoughts on Completionist Cape, because I think on a Q&A you were kind of talking, and this is a while ago, so maybe you've changed your view, but something like an 80% sort of completion cape on those lines where it's not, you don't have to complete everything, but just hit a certain threshold.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So I think that's the only design solution that works. Like, I'd stand by that quite strongly, in that I think we could benefit from hindsight, looking at what RuneScape's done with Completionist Cape over the years. But also from, obviously, the things like collection logging and so on. RuneScape had an issue where, like, they made the Completionist Cape best in slot.
Yeah.
Right, it's the best cape in game. Best stats, it's tribrid as well. Like, it's basically the de facto best cape, basically, no matter what you were doing.
Yeah.
And I think you can argue that's justified, right? Like, oh my god, you've put so much effort to get that cape. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes it this ridiculous goal that everyone wants. Which is, fine. But that has consequences. It means every time you add a requirement, a lot of people will be maybe not necessarily annoyed, but they have to go and do that thing. But also, with things like this, requirements are always getting higher, right? Like, the Completionist Cape, let's say we released it today, it would be harder in 2040 than it would be today. By far. We'd have way more content, way more things to do. Is that right? That the same reward takes a lot longer to get in future? I mean, maybe. That's kind of the name of the cape, right? That's what it's all about. But there's things like that are a concern that led to friction in RuneScape, because what should be counted as completion?
Yep.
There's some things that are maybe a little ambiguous. Some things I'd sort of define it as like everything that can be completed and not undone possibly can be things that require it. But then there's still a need to split it. Where it's like you can complete Theatre of Blood and get those, what is it, 5,000 completions for the top cape? I don't know
It
what the
was
number is.
going to be 5,000. It was 2,000 because people were freaking out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there you go, right? 2,000's a lot.
It
Is that
is.
fair to include on the comp cape?
I know.
Should it be on a trim cape? Because that's what RuneScape were dealing with. They had a trim cape, they had a comp cape, and then they had to use their sort of guidelines to try and dictate what should be comp, what should be trim, and what should be nothing at all.
Yeah.
Because some things are so extreme. For example, the collection log. You can complete the collection log. No one has, because it's
No one
that
will.
extreme.
Yeah.
And should that be on the trim comp? Should that be a comp cape requirement? Because essentially what I'm saying is, if you make it require everything to the letter of the fact that it is completable, no one will ever have the cape. Which means we have to draw a line somewhere. And that line is very hard to define. Is it just like, this thing takes over X hours, thus it shouldn't be included? Like, it's so difficult. That's why I argue for the percentage solution. In that you can then include everything. The collection log can be on there. Obviously all the clue scores and within there, all the pets.
Yep.
Every other crazy thing, like the 2,000 Theatre of Blood capes. Many people have got them, but to me, it's the same sort of thing. There's nothing inherently wrong with having an awesome cape to show off that you've been massively addicted to Theatre of Blood, but it only gets criticized because of essentially this. It conflicts with the collection community, and like people want to get everything. So we have to be careful with these systems because they can almost stop us from doing certain things. So this percentage solution means we go for the factual argument. Things are completable if they can be done and not undone. That to me is completable content. That is everything that's completable. No matter how absurd the times involved are, they should be on the list. But by going for 90%, you can always avoid a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? You could choose to avoid them. But still, you're then still rewarding people if they do the absurd thing. Because if they've got it done, then they can leave out some other stuff. So, and maybe some people make the argument that, like, hey, I haven't completed the game, but I've got the cape to show it. Well, you've still completed more than most people. So I don't think that's an issue necessarily. If you've completed 90% of the game's content, you damn well deserve a bloody cape for it. So, to me, I think that's a reasonable direction to go with it. But I still have like some of these deeper concerns about the way it influences almost the psychology of players and what is acceptable for us to do and what's not acceptable for us to do for other reasons. And I don't know. There's no immediate plans to do a Completionist Cape. It's not even a cheap project for us to do. It'd be a bit of a painful thing for us to implement. But
yeah, there's. I mean, the pros. Like whenever I see the Completionist Cape, I think somebody on one of the mods on Twitter has posted the concept art of it, and it just looks beautiful. Like, yeah, that would be pretty cool. But the downsides are literally. I mean, people are going to freak out about any update. Then, I mean, with your solution, it's better because then you can kind of pick and choose what you're choosing, and you can go above that threshold. So, if an update happens, you're not going to get completely punished, and you have to do that content to reobtain your cape. But that is one of the problems. Is it starts incentivizing people to vote no specifically because they don't want to have to do more stuff. Like they just want to keep their cape. And I like the I know Mod Husky's been working on the collection log thing, whatever that will be, the staff of acquirement idea or the wieldable collection log or something like that. But that idea sounds a lot more reasonable, and that in my head, I even think that could almost replace something of a completionist system where now you're actually being incentivized to vote yes to more content because you actually kind of want to get, you want more avenues to get more collection logs in a way. So I don't know. It's a tough one. There's pros and cons, and ultimately it's just cool to have new flex items in the game, but who knows what it'll do, like you said, to the psychology of the players.
I think that stuff's kind of fine because it isn't changing anything. It's just sort of rewarding things for people. So it's rewarding people for things they're already doing.
Yeah.
They're already doing the collection log. I've wanted it on the high scores for a long time, for instance, and that's obviously a small component. But like, it'd be awesome to have it on the high scores. A lot of people are going for it. Dang well, I want to see what rank I am and so on. That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a nice interface and a nice extra little bit of a reward. At the end of the day, not many people are going to hang around with that stuff, right? Like cosmetics are not a massive deal necessarily,
No.
except for when you're sort of bank standing or just wanting to flex. Like just a nice nod, right? Just be able to say I'm rank X in the collection log system. But yeah, I think that stuff's good. But completion is another level. Like it's a tricky subject, and at the end of the day, you could argue essentially collection log is kind of in the same territory. At the end of the day, what's missing from it? It's maxing. It's getting all the quests done, but at the end of the day, those are the other completion requirements. There's obviously a few other things, completing all the mini quests and so on, but these are such minor components. All the time-consuming stuff that was required for Completionist Cape is probably on our collection log.
Yeah. Okay, so we've seen just over the past couple months a new sort of meta when it comes to clue scrolls, which is just like dropping them because now there's an hour-long timer with untradeable clue scrolls. And I want to get your thoughts on just the potential for stackable clues in the future and what I don't know if you're allowed to talk on behalf of the team, but have you guys considered that? I know Leagues has come by and a lot of people always demand it immediately afterward. And now it feels like there's almost stackable clues in the game already, just a more tedious version of it.
So my personal view, and I'm sure there's people in the team, at the end of the day, this is another thing that's maybe I can touch on quickly.
Yeah.
The stance of the team is a complex matter, right? Obviously, the way people talk about things, it's like Jagex have decided X or Jagex have decided this. It's like the core old school team, 70 odd people. There's different views within that, but obviously we have to come to a conclusion and decide as a group like what's the best action, or someone needs to make a decision, right? But at the end of the day, it's quite complex. It's not like we all share the same view and we're the same person. People do genuinely think different things, and not because we have different philosophies, but these things are ambiguous. It's what is better for the game and what's not better for the game. To me, I think making stackable clues would be a bad move. Because to me, the philosophy of clues is that they're very much in that distraction space. I'm doing Slayer, I get a clue. Oh, hell yeah. I can take a break from Slayer, I'm going to go and do this clue. And maybe get something awesome out of it. And maybe I've always had the attitude that I will never break a task. I'll always get one on the task, finish the task, then do one clue. Or one clue per task. But stackable clues would fundamentally change this. In that I would never take a break from Slayer. I would just stack them up until whatever limit we define. And obviously that can change things. If the limit's as small as like 5, it's completely different if it's 100 or 2.1 billion, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
To me, the distraction is is a huge part of the value in clues. The fact you have to do one before you get another one and so on. I think that's hugely important, and I don't necessarily want to change it into some like massive efficiency problem. And that's why I feel uneasy about the 1 hour thing.
Yeah.
I know that's in the game right now, but like I feel uneasy for the same thing, for the same reasons that I don't like the idea that it's suddenly efficient to be dropping a clue while you're completing a Slayer task, to keep on using the same example.
Yep.
Let's say you're killing whatever it is, abyssal demons, you get a clue, you drop it, you keep on killing them, you get another one, you drop it, and then you do all the clues after the task.
Yeah.
Well, there's multiple implications of this. One is more clues will be completed. That means more third age in the game, more things, more ranger boots in the economy, all that sort of stuff. That's a problem for its own value, in that it's going to impact the price of these items potentially. But it also changes again. Come back and almost to this. Like, I'm not a psychologist, but it kind of comes. So I don't really promise to understand it, but it does come back to a similar thing. The human psychology aspect of it is it's changed your relationship with clues in a way that like people want it because it sounds good. It sounds like great. It means I don't have to interrupt my activities to go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would change it into a somewhat negative interaction where it's like you just save up a bunch of clues and then later on you just go and do them all. It stops it being quite a unique activity. Not many activities in old school directly disrupt the stuff you're already doing. You just come on old school today and you say, I'm going to do Slayer today, or I'm going to do Next today, or I'm going to do Raids today. Clues would just enter the same space if you were storing them in your bank. So
yeah, I've always been against stackable clues. I know it's just since the update with Implings back in like 2015. I mean, we've already basically had stackable clues when it comes to main accounts, at least for like hards, mediums, and easies. And again, that's assuming you want to spend the money on them, but there was a big time where it was still super profitable to just farm magpies or whatever it was. But I worry now with this hour update because we basically already have stackable clues, but it's in the wonkiest way possible, and it just feels like, I know this is like the worst terminology because it's so ambiguous, but like private servery, to just be dropping your clues and stacking them up, and kind of, because everyone's doing it now. Like, well, not everyone, but the people I'm watching on stream and stuff, it's efficient now to just drop your clues repeatedly. And so I'm concerned it's either, is that in the game permanently? Like, is like the hour timer just never going to be changed? Is it always going to be this way? Because if that's the case, my opinion on stackable clues has changed that entirely, because I think it would literally be better to have a stack system of 5 or 10, or maybe it upgrades over time, rather than the system we have now. Although ultimately I would actually prefer it to just be reverted so there wasn't this whole dropping thing in the first place. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, no, so ultimately you'd prefer us to get rid of the hour timer and not have stackable clues in any form. But if it was going to remain an hour,
it's almost better.
You'd rather us just do stackable clues and let people do it with the quality of life.
That's generally my opinion on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly see the argument. The thing I'd say is, like, you're probably in the sort of more minority niche of players who will do the dropping thing.
Because I feel obligated to. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel obligated to. But I would probably reckon most casual players don't.
You're right.
Because it's quite an extreme way to do clues. You still have to deal with the whole dropping, going back to it, and getting the next one, and all that sort of stuff. Without the pressure of the time limit that used to exist for this. But I could still see a reason why a lot of people wouldn't do it. But most people wouldn't even think about it. They might not even know it's a thing. But in all honesty, we haven't really had a conversation about it in the team. It might be something we talk about, and in all honesty, my view would be I'd rather dial it back myself. But I know that's not necessarily the view of everybody.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're a community-driven game, and we need to also think about what the players want. If the players really, really want stackable clues, we have to consider it.
Yeah.
And that's that is the nature of how Old School as a game works. So, we can always think what's best, but at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want us as a design team to be narcissistic or egotistical or arrogant about the fact, hey, we're designers, the players aren't. I don't want us to take the attitude that we know better, because I'd say most of the time we don't. The players probably play the game more than most of us. There's plenty of people in the team who play the game extensively. I've played my game 189 days since it came out in latter 2020. Is it 2021? It must have been, yeah. That's scary as well. It's only been 3 years. But most people are playing the game more than us, and we have to respect they've got voices. We're looking after the game on the player's behalf, but we do have to care about what's healthy for the game, what's not healthy, what would harm it, what would improve it. At the end of the day, this is a fairly I wouldn't say this is a hill to die on, right?
Hmm.
It's not something we should be like, oh my God, you're ruining Old School if we make clues stackable. I feel like it's worse for it to be stackable, but it's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
If people are going to enjoy it more, I'd be willing to concede on that. But as I stand, I think it is a bit of a mistake. But you're probably right to point out this mid ground is definitely not a good place to be, and we should move back or forward one way or another.
That's how I feel. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Just like more put it in the community's hands and just decide what they want. Because I had always been pretty against stackable clues, but like at this point, a limit maybe does feel better than rather than just doing one clue that's only 4 steps long. I don't see there really being a problem with doing a full Slayer task, completing the task, and having maybe 4 or 5 clue scrolls and having a 20-step, whole process, because that still is relatively short. And maybe it would just actually feel better. And we've just been so dogmatic that we're like, no, that's against Old School's
Yeah.
clue policy. But maybe it would be good for the game. So
What do you think about clues, by the way? Because like we've not done an update to clues in a while,
yeah,
besides adding new ones for like Varlamore and stuff like that. Because it makes sense to make new areas feel integrated and thus
hmm
have new clues. But I mean, essentially, the value of adding new clues is just it slowly adds to the requirements clues have. You get a bit more variety when you do clues, which is maybe nice. But at the end of the day, it's just more items to collect for remote clues and so on. And new rewards, like obviously we can come up with new cosmetics and so on, but at the end of the day, all the cosmetics for clues largely suffer the same problem. They're basically worthless. You
yeah,
pull out like a whatever, like a cat mask. It doesn't matter. It's worthless.
yeah,
So
yeah.
like what do we do to update clues? Because a lot of people love clues. A lot
hmm
of people would like updates to clues. But I feel like we've kind of eaten up the space in terms of like we now have beginner all the way through master. I don't think there's necessarily room for another tier.
Yeah,
Maybe you can argue there's a grandmaster and it's some extreme stuff, but like, what do you reward from clues? Like, it's kind of weird actually that like medium clues are somewhat the most significant because of ranger boots, and they play a role in a best in slot item. But none of the other clues really do that. There's some utility to them, like Iron Man find a lot of value in God D'hide, of course,
yeah.
and that plays a role for a lot of players.
Well,
Or even just access to Black D'hide early on if you're grinding hard clues. So
it's just awkward because on top of it, I mean, we have so many cloggers nowadays that, I mean, they would be deeply offended if you were to
yeah,
if you were to add even one, if you were to add a lion mask to the meat, just literally one unique. That means every single person that's green logged the medium log now has to go for this one singular item, which basically is like, not entirely doing their grind again. But if they get unlucky, that's another 1,000+ medium clues they have to do just to get one new unique. So
yeah.
it wasn't a problem having clue expansions before the collection log. And the last one we had really was just around the time of the collection log. And it wasn't that big of a deal. But nowadays, it's like, okay, if you literally add any uniques to any of these tiers, people are going to get really upset. And I don't think it's necessary to have Grandmaster either. The only thing I could, I'll just briefly make a point on this is like Grandmaster clues. What I thought would be cool, and this is a little idea, is like you have to sacrifice, maybe it's a master casket, or maybe it could come from all the caskets. Potentially you get a Grandmaster. And what the Grandmaster step is it's just one step, and it's high risk, high reward, where, it's like, boom, you've opened it. Do you want to risk this casket? And you risk it. And then, you have, like a minute or something to get to a certain dig spot. It's going to give you like a little clue, and then you dig, and you don't know what's about to spawn, but it could be like triple Jads. It could just be one Jad. It could be some crazy 5-man pirate team that just starts attacking you, and you have to defeat the enemy basically in the time, and then you get the reward. So there's no real challenge that's requiring, clue or Sherlock steps or anything else, but it's just some immediate encounter that's really intense, and you don't know really what's going to happen. But
Sort of like gameplay expansions to
yeah,
clues, really. is
it's
maybe the direction rather than new rewards and so on.
yeah, and it could come out with new third age, but even that's scary because people don't, as soon as you come out with one new third age, you're just pissing everybody off. That's a clogger. So I don't know what you guys are going to do with that. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I've done a lot of clues on my game, and I've been one page short of completed the shared treasure trove awards for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I know the pain, despite not really caring about it,
Yeah.
of being one item short. And, that could be a long time
I
to get that
know.
last item.
Yeah.
Um, I'm short of a Bandos page 1.
It's
All the
always
others I've
Bandos.
got.
Yeah.
I've had good luck with my mediums. I've done 413 mediums for my game squad, and I've got 3 ranger boots.
Woo.
That's great. It's really lucky. But I know how far I am off completing the log. It's a bloody long way. So yeah, I can
It's
understand if
it's
like we
tough.
added loads of rewards that it's going to piss a lot of people off. But at the end of the day, it's the same. It's the same issue we were talking about before. Really, it's like 95% of the players don't give a shit, and
Yeah, and I don't think
that
you.
and that's the challenge we've got to deal with. But
Yeah.
we've got to try and cater to both.
And again, like I'm literally one of those people that mildly cares about collection log, but I really think it's important to just, if we really do want a clue expansion, who knows if the community, I would imagine it would definitely pass a poll, but you can't
Yeah.
care. You just can't care. You just got to send it. But again, it's like, man, the collection log mentality has really like infested the game. So you're
Yeah,
gonna
I mean,
weep a whirlwind of criticism.
it's changed the way people think about things. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing, as much as we've obviously talked about it and how it affects our decisions quite a lot. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's probably net positive in terms of it's allowed a lot of content to thrive in a way that it hasn't done before. Lots of people care about stuff they wouldn't play otherwise. So it's probably a good thing overall, and it's sort of a new age of RuneScape that
Yeah.
a lot of people care about this stuff. In fact, I've been iterating game design pillars for the old school team and the design team. In that, it's not something we've ever done. And design pillars, for anybody who doesn't know, is basically it's a set of almost principles that everything we do follow. So I've got 6 in the works, and I'm not going to sort of share these all. Although I would like to talk to the community at some point about these. This all sort of work in progress. They're just about done. But one of these is single player but together. And I don't think they expect that to leave the pillars or anything in iteration, but at its core, it really is that old school RuneScape is a single player game. In so many ways.
Hmm.
Not in every single way, but if old school RuneScape was an offline game that you downloaded and played by yourself, most of the game works. You can train your skills, you can complete your quests, you can do all these things. But I don't think anyone would play it. Not to the same, not. I mean, I wouldn't say nobody, but nowhere near the same level of success we have today. So the community is an important element of it, but it does show the sort of way that people approach the game, because that is definitely true. It is all about your own achievements. It's all about your own progression. You spend most of your time leveling your skills to max. That takes a long time, and it's all about you. It's not about anybody else. You're completing your quests is a very independent thing. Completing your collection log is the same thing. A huge proportion of our players nowadays obviously play Iron Man, which is even more a single player.
Yep.
Like the game fundamentally works and has almost been balanced such that it is single player friendly, such that when we do multiplayer focused features, like you can almost argue stuff like the evil chicken outfit is a multiplayer feature, and that it's so rare. It's not designed such that one player gets it by themselves. It's designed such that you can buy it, and that if you get lucky, you can make money from god eggs.
Hmm.
And so it's understandable if you think about this as a sort of pillar, and that most of the game works single player. It feels weird, or it's problematic when things don't. And so this is almost what I'm getting at with this pillar, is that like most people view the game this way, most of our features work this way, And that is to say something we should embrace, because despite being an MMO, most of the game is single player oriented.
Yep.
What the pillar is also saying is the community side is important. The fact you're on a journey alongside other people, you have other people to flex about your collection like achievements too, or whatever your achievements are, is also important. The fact there's a community to discuss things with. Like, I would say, for the size of Old School, and I think it's incredibly successful, we've grown an awful lot, but for the size the game is, we hit well above our weight in terms of impact on Reddit, YouTube, Twitter. Our presence on the internet is so much more than it almost should be for a game of our size.
Yeah.
And why is that? Well, I think almost perhaps being single player oriented and so on, but still social is why that really, really works. You want to flex, you want to share your achievements, you want to show off. And I think that really leans into that. So what I'm getting out of that design pillar is all of this. Like, these things are important. We need to think very carefully when we add things that are multiplayer oriented, basically. And so, like, when we add a raid that's might well be often aiming at teams, we do need to be careful about the fact that a lot of people do view the game very single player oriented. And so, do I like that Tombs of Amaska is mostly played by solos? I don't think so, actually. I think the optimal setup for like Tour, and I'm not saying this will be the setup for a future raid, but if I'm looking back at Tour in hindsight, I wish, and this is easier said than done, that Tour was efficient to do in teams, but viable solo. So, like, let's say it's 100% efficiency is to go in teams of like 4, right? I'm just picking a number off my head. Solo maybe is 70% efficient, right? Like, to give some perspective, so maybe it's 100 hours to complete for a team of 4, and maybe it's 130 or something if you're soloing. And like, to me, then there's a trade-off, right? Like, you can choose to play it as a team and have a great time, because I think the benefits to team play at these pieces of content is so much more fun.
It is.
I mean, it varies, and obviously people have different perspectives, and there's loads of challenges team content introduced, which I think is why we should still have an element of catering to solo. Is that finding groups is hard. It becomes a gatekeeping activity. You almost need to have kill count to prove to groups you're good enough to join their group, and all this sort of problem. And other MMOs have this problem too. But that's why we keep solo viable. But we keep it at a balance that there's a genuine more of a trade-off going on there. So that solo is valuable because it helps you learn Tour. But imagine if the solo experience was learning and proving that you can do it in order that you can join groups and get a slightly more efficient rate. Like, I think that's a really generally good philosophy. And as I say, it's easier said than done. That's quite hard to balance, and there's loads of factors that need to be considered to pull that off. But I think that's the ideal setup, and that's not the situation we're in.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And Ron plays games. I had him on back in January, and like, he is, and most people in the community probably agree that they would love it if team content was really the efficient way to go about it. I mean, he brought up an argument, and I fully agree with it, and I've been actually speaking it a lot as well, is something that's just fundamentally backwards now, looking at it now, like with hindsight, is losing points in raids. And I'm basically, to kind of illustrate, like, when Husky made like Sepulcher, one of the punishments, if you didn't make the time, you would like lose XP on top of just spending more time getting through the entire maze. And he realized, okay, this is really backwards because you're already losing XP by just not going fast enough. So
yeah.
With chambers, I mean, when you lose 40% of your points to a death, like, you're already being inefficient by dying in the first place. You're losing time. So you've already lost points technically when you're looking at the effective points per hour. And just getting a huge dip in your points on top of that is just like the worst feeling ever. So if I'm doing a chambers mass on stream, even with 15 or 20 people, I'm just expecting to go in there with no purple chance, basically, because everyone's gonna die. It's just gonna be bad. If we could just eliminate that mechanic of losing points and just accept that you're being inefficient because you're bringing in noobs and it's just gonna take longer anyway, that'd be a much healthier way to go about it. And it's the same thing. I'm looking at almost all the raids. Like if you had Toa, where you don't lose any points for dying, it's simply slowing down the raid by dying. And if you're in a solo and you die, then you've wiped the raid. I mean, obviously Toa has the invocation where you can just keep repeating it. But if you just had a system where you're not losing points in teams, that alone would be enough to almost like just give you the desire to go in with teams, because then you're not feeling like you're risking your points by bringing more, potential dyers in there, but people think they're going to die repeatedly. So
I think there's a lot of logic to that. Thing is, though, scuffed equals stuff. So that's what we keep telling
Scuff would equal
ourselves
more stuff with this new system, though. Yeah.
We got our Tebow on our game squad after dying 3 times. It was quite funny.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's not true, right?
Yeah.
You are less likely to get a job in that case. But yeah, I think there's a lot of logic to that. I think it's a balance, because we don't want people to sort of just, because there's this whole balance of no preps versus preps, and if death comes with just a time punishment, you'd probably almost certainly just no prep, right? Like death's not going to cost so much time that it's worth taking 5 minutes to prep. So I think there's a balance, but you're right. Like it doesn't need to be 40%. If it was, there's a whole scale there. It could be 5%, and maybe that's still an all right place to be. But
I would even argue like literally losing points is just never the way, because ultimately, you can see it as you don't need a prep, but as soon as you've let's just imagine you're in a 5-man team. As soon as you lose a person to a death, okay, the whole raid is slowed down, and that person is now no longer gaining points. So their punishment is they're not getting any more points for the raid, because now they're paused. They're sitting.
Yeah.
And now you've even incentivized bringing more players on, because if you only have 2 players and one of them dies, not only have you just slowed down the raid drastically, but now you're risking potentially, ruining the raid. And I would even say the invocation where you get multiple lives, I feel like that shouldn't be an invocation ever in the future. I feel like if you wipe, you're out. And that shouldn't, they're even, so learning raids would actually be more comfortable in larger settings ultimately, because, and so inevitably solos would be the harder route and, just as rewarding as a group thing, but you actually are risking a lot more, because if you wipe, now there is no repeating stuff. So you're still in, I don't know.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it differs based. Chambers is a unique situation.
Yeah.
Because the dynamics of death are so different.
That's true.
And so I agree with the principle though, that death should be punished, right? We want death to not be something you just want to happen or embrace happening, in that time is a punishment, is the acknowledgement, right? Is the time punishment enough is the question we've got to ask. And I think in the case of Theatre of Blood or Tombs of a Massacre, I think that's unequivocally probably true.
Yeah. But in Chambers, you're right, it's weird.
Different dynamic, right? Because
it is
you can run back in the fight in 30 seconds, pick up the loot you had on the floor and crack on. The punishment's nowhere near as severe as not being able to take part in the rest of the fight. So you might need a dynamic where in Chambers, if you're going to permit people to do that you do need to take some points off. But I understand the point, and I don't disagree with it.
You could even make it so you fundamentally rework Chambers. So everybody could die, but you can't go back into the Olm room, let's say. So if you die, you now cannot re-enter. You can just watch from the portal, but you don't want to die, because now you're really slowing things down for everybody, and you're making.
I think that would be good. That would be better. But at the end of the day, it's not the sort of thing we would probably want to retrofit.
It's tough.
It's something to more consider probably on future raids and future team boss stuff. But the thing I'd love to retrofit to Chambers though is is the purple chest stuff that like Theatre of Blood has or Tombs of
Yes.
Mascot
Oh
has.
my God, that would be like if you guys were to spend a little. I mean, this would actually be a pretty big system. But like if you made it so when you defeat Olm, there's like a staircase that goes down, and then you have the treasure room. And I mean, it would be so hard to do this because you can go into chambers with 100 people. So where's the 100 chests gonna be? But maybe you
God,
could.
I mean that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's realistically you have two chests. You have a purple one
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and a non-purple one, perhaps.
or, or,
But
or just like a chest that could potentially pop out, but there's just this big pile of gold, and you just click the pile of gold, get your rewards, and then
yeah,
there could be
I
a
mean,
potential purple chest.
in all honesty, it's enough probably to do there's a RuneLite plugin that already does it. It just makes it this player has received a question mark drop, right?
Mm,
And that enough is probably that is probably enough because but obviously one thing we've had in mind with these systems is we don't want people to build a scam without being found out.
yes.
So it's important that you can scam,
Yeah.
right? There's nothing actually stopping you scamming at Theatre of Blood, except your reputation will be gone.
Oh yeah.
And that's enough of a distraction in 99% of
Oh
cases.
yeah.
So in chambers, you would probably, if you still stick with the one chess thing, you would need to still announce that this person's got a purple, but not have to say what it is. Because my God, isn't it great? The tension. You don't know what's going to be looted. And we thought about that obviously with what we did with Tombs of a Mascot. We wanted to sort of how can we one up that experience? How can we make that experience of getting that rare drop that extra bit special? And so having that weird mechanic that happens where it sort of cycles through the drop, so it takes a while to appear, right? In terms
Yeah.
of what it is. Um, you're like, oh my God, what's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be?
That would be sick.
You're sat there thinking, what on earth is it? And then a bloody sorry, not rapier.
Justice sure or what?
The
Or
the,
just
the fang appears.
oh
Sorry.
okay yeah yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Always the
like
fang.
it's a great moment though when it's not the fang. Like, but even Theatre of Blood, which doesn't do that. I remember getting my scythe drop, and it's like, holy shit! You just don't expect it. You open that chest, and you're like, what's it gonna be?
Yeah.
And then it's just there. It's like, wow. It makes it special. And obviously, you can see what we've learned and tried to excel, like step this up as we've gone, and we learned a lot. So I wouldn't mind retrofitting that sort of thing to Chambers because I think it's awesome to see that. And it kind of sucks that the experience of knowing whether you got a purple drop amounts to does it appear in the chat 2 seconds after
Yeah.
Olm dies? Like,
Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, you're right. I feel like that would actually be a really cool update to Chambers. That would actually be worthwhile spending a little bit of dev time just reworking how that whole reward system works, no matter what it is. So,
yeah, I think it'd be really cool. But it's just one of those things that it's like it's finding the time to do it,
mhm.
and so on. And yeah, then in theory we could, but often then it's actually a bit easy. It's harder said than done because of the way the code's being done,
Yeah.
and so on. So
Okay.
yeah.
Last kind of thing I want to touch on before we wrap things up is RuneFest. So,
Yes.
RuneFest is coming back after 5 years this September. Do you know? I think I briefly brought it up to Mod Sarni, just the whole like RuneFest ticket situation. Do you know if there's any news on that? I don't know if you're able to share if there is, but because I know it just got instantly sold out. But are you excited for RuneFest as well? That's another question I have.
Oh well, I'm absolutely buzzing for RuneFest. I've been to obviously so many, and I was going to RuneFest well before I joined Jagex. So I didn't go to the first two RuneFests, which I think were 2010 and 2011. I mean, I was 17, 18 back then.
Hmm.
But I went to the every single one since. So we didn't do one in 2012, and then 2013 I went to RuneFest, and I'd been to every single RuneFest since then. Obviously 2013, 2014, I went as a player, and then 2015 onwards it's been as staff, which is obviously quite a
So
different
cool.
experience. But there's nothing that like if people haven't been or you're going for your first time, like it's a special experience. Like it sounds cringe because like oh my God, we're just all nerds meeting up to talk about RuneScape or have a RuneScape themed space, but like
Yeah.
it kind of makes it seem so much more real, especially for us staff. It's like at the end of the day, you see people on Reddit, you see people on Twitter, you watch Twitch streams and so on. It's not like they're. It's almost like you forget they're real people. But
Yeah.
then you go to an event, and you're like we see how many members we've got every day or how many players are playing. It's like you know how many people are online. There's 132,000 people online right now. It's just a number, but that's a huge number. When you go to RuneFest and there's a couple of thousand people there in person, it kind of really helps to put it in perspective. And people are so nice. People are so grateful for the game and everything, and people are buzzing to be there, having a great time. You get to meet your friends that you've maybe never met before, and it's amazing what the game can do with RuneFest. So it's it's good stuff. And I'm sure everybody who's going will really have an amazing time. And I can't recommend it to more people. And hopefully on the back of this, we can be doing more RuneFest in the future again as well. It sucks that it's sort of been taken away from us for the last 4 years because of
Yeah.
firstly because of pandemic and then sort of building up the sort of plans to do it again have taken time as well. But in terms of tickets, I mean, God, we had no idea. Like, it
Yeah.
kind of makes sense in hindsight, but like, it was crazy that it just sold out like that. To put in perspective, like, I know a lot of people are sort of angry because they've missed out, and that's totally valid because I completely get it.
Yeah.
But like, no RuneFest had ever sold out before.
Oh my
Like, we were
God.
close. 2019, we were close. So
And wasn't
RuneFest
there?
2019, I believe, was about 1,500
Yeah,
tickets,
that's, oh my God.
1,500. This RuneFest was about 2,000. So it's bigger. It's bigger than ever, and no RuneFest ever has sold out before.
Oh my
So to sell out one in 5-10 minutes, however long it was completely outside of our expectations.
Oh my
So
God.
it's ridiculous. So in hindsight, now I think about it, it's like, well, you got pent up demand, right? It's been 5 years since the last one. So fair enough. Okay, there's pent up demand. People are going to have the attitude of I can't miss this one because who knows when the next one will be. It's been 5 years. Well, when it's every year, there's a much more acceptance to say, oh, I don't fancy it this year. Or I can't afford it this year.
Mm-hmm.
With this dynamic, it's like I need to make this one. I'll make it work.
Yep.
So there's that component. There's then also the fact that the game's grown a lot. Old School's bigger today than it was in 2019 by a decent margin. So there's more players. I think that doesn't help, right? For selling Rune, you're gonna sell at a RuneFest event more quickly. But also, I would say our player base is generally a bit older.
Yep.
So like in a real adult sense, more people have jobs, more people have money, more people can have disposable income to afford to do something like this. I'm not saying everyone's in that boat. I realize the world has its own challenges and things cost a lot, and RuneFest isn't cheap to do either. But all I'm saying is more people can afford it probably now than they could
Oh
in
yeah.
2019, and that also doesn't help in terms of the amount of people going. It's a good problem for us to have selfishly as Jagex, it's
Yeah.
amazing to be able to have that demand and that many people to go. And I know they're exploring what they can do, and I'm sure there'll be announcements in due course to what we're doing to be able to help. But it's yeah, hopefully we can get more people in,
Yeah.
basically.
Exciting stuff, nonetheless, for those that did get tickets, and I'm really
Are you
stoked.
going?
I mean, I'm most likely. I mean, I'm still sort of holding off on potential accommodations. I know there was some news, but yeah. I mean, I definitely like need to go, so I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, you can most likely count on me being there, so I'm excited.
Also, that'd be amazing to see you there, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll have an absolutely amazing time.
Oh yeah. I mean TwitchCon last year was like really like when you're meeting, 70 plus, 80 plus OSR's creators all in one Airbnb partying, like it's just
Yeah.
surreal. It's surreal. So I know it's going to be similar to that. So and it'll be my first time in Europe, so across the
Yeah, so you've
Atlantic.
never been to Europe, never been to the UK. That's its
No,
own
yeah.
experience as well. Welcome to the weather. Hopefully, it doesn't rain, but it's good chance it
Yeah.
will.
Yeah. No, I'm used to that. Well, Kieren, I greatly appreciate your time today. This was like super, super fun for me. I'm grateful we could finally get this going. And yeah, so thank you all still listening. Down in the description, I'll have Kieren's Twitter. And is there any other links you'd want provided? I don't know if you, I think you.
Twitter is fine. I think
Okay.
that covers it really.
Perfect. Well, next week we're going to have Asterix on, who is the editor of Behemoth community channel, which I'm really excited about. He's been doing that for a few years now. And then a surprise guest for the week following, which I'm really excited about announcing. So I'll have that in my Twitter. So go follow me on Twitter, everybody.
I'm curious who it is.
Yeah, well, I'll let you know right as I end this recording. So you can, but yeah,
thank you so much for having me on, by the way.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, guys. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.